My phone rang at 5:30 in the morning. Sis, Dad died last night, my sister Bianca said coldly. He left everything to me and my husband. You get nothing. In the background, my brother-in-law Preston laughed. Finally, you are out, Camille. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply put the call on speaker because my dad was sitting right beside me sipping his morning coffee. Dad leaned toward the phone and said something that made their blood run cold. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit likes and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic family members. My name is Camille. I am 32 years old and I work as a forensic accountant here in Atlanta. For years, my family treated me like the boring, invisible daughter because I cared more about spreadsheets than social climbing. My sister Bianca, who is 35, was the golden child. She was beautiful, obsessed with her image, and married to Preston, a white wealth manager who looked down on our family. My dad, Marcus, is a self-made billionaire who built the largest logistics empire in the South. Let us go back to that morning. The harsh ringing of my phone broke the quiet dawn. When I answered, Bianca did not even say hello. She just delivered the news of our father's supposed death with the casual tone of someone ordering brunch. Preston chimed in, his voice dripping with that country club arrogance I despised. We are executing the power of attorney today, he sneered. Do not bother coming to the house. Security already has your photo. We will send you a generic floral arrangement for the memorial, assuming you can afford a dress for it on your little accountant's salary. My training as a fraud investigator taught me one golden rule. When a scammer thinks they have won you, let them keep talking. They always hand you the rope to hang them with. I looked across my kitchen island. My father, Marcus Vance, was wrapped in a thick cashmere robe, looking pale but very much alive. I locked eyes with him and pressed the speaker button. Dad took a slow, deliberate sip of his black coffee. Then he leaned toward the microphone. Preston, my dad, boomed, his voice deep and raspy. You disappoint me, son. And this coffee is a lot more bitter than I expected this morning. The dead silence on the other end of the line was absolute music to my ears. I could practically hear the color draining from Preston's face. Daddy, Bianca stammered, her perfectly curated voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. But the doctor at the hospital said you were gone. The doctor said my prognosis was severe and that I needed an emergency bypass. Dad interrupted, his tone lethal. But instead of staying by my side, you and your husband slipped out the back door of the emergency room. You did not even wait for my heart to stop beating before you sprinted to the surrogate court to steal my company. Let me explain what actually happened. The night before, Dad collapsed at his Buckhead estate from a massive heart attack. Bianca and Preston happened to be there, supposedly discussing family investments. They rode with him in the ambulance. When the attending physician pulled them aside to say Dad likely would not survive the night, my sister did not call me. She called her lawyers. But what Bianca did not know was that the head nurse on the cardiac floor was an old college sister of mine from Spelman. She texted me the second Dad hit the emergency room doors. By the time Bianca and Preston were speeding away to draft fraudulent estate documents, I was already landing a private medical helicopter on the hospital roof. I airlifted my father to an exclusive off-the-books cardiac facility where my own specialist stabilized him within hours. You left me to die, Bianca, Dad said, the heartbreak in his voice quickly hardening into pure, unadulterated rage. You thought a 64-year-old man was just going to roll over and hand you the keys to the kingdom. Marcus, listen. This is a misunderstanding. Preston tried to interject, his voice trembling as his corporate bravado evaporated. We were just trying to protect the corporate assets from market volatility. Shut your mouth! Preston, I finally spoke, leaning into the phone. You did not protect anything. You bribed a corrupt physician to sign a preliminary declaration of death so you could trigger the succession clause in the company bylaws. That is a felony. It is fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. You are just a glorified bookkeeper. Camille, Bianca shrieked, her panic turning into viciousness. You do not know anything. Preston manages billions. You audit tax returns for mid-tier businesses. I am a senior partner in forensic accounting. Bianca. I corrected her, my voice ice cold. I do not balance books. I hunt down dirty money. And Preston has the dirtiest money I have ever seen. Just then my father's private secure line rang. It was his chief operating officer. Dad put it on speaker. Mr. Vance, thank God you are okay. The officer voice was frantic. Preston legal team just submitted a death certificate to the board. They have locked down the corporate accounts and are trying to execute a wire transfer of $50 million to an offshore shell company. Dad looked at me. The betrayal in his eyes was profound, but the fire of a self-made survivor burned brighter. Cancel the wire, Dad ordered. I cannot, sir, the officer replied. Preston used the emergency succession protocols. Only a federal injunction or a physical override at the Buckhead Estate Master Terminal can stop it. And he hired private security. They have locked down the house. I picked up my phone. Bianca and Preston were still on the line, listening in horrified silence. You have exactly 20 minutes to enjoy my father house, Preston, I said, my voice steady. Because we are coming over, and I highly suggest you pack your bags. I ended the call, cutting off my sister hysterical screaming. I looked at my father. He set his coffee mug down, standing up with a newfound strength that defied the heart attack he had suffered just hours ago. Get my coat, Camille, he said. We have a home to reclaim. The drive from my secure townhouse to my father Buckhead estate took exactly 18 minutes. I drove my matte black SUV with calculated precision, my mind already mapping out the financial web Preston had woven. My father sat in the passenger seat, his breathing steady, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He had spent his entire life building an empire so that his daughters would never have to bow to anyone, only to have his eldest daughter sell out her own blood to a man who saw our family as nothing but an ATM. As we turned onto the private tree-lined driveway of the estate, the sheer audacity of Preston operation came into full view. 2 black vehicles blocked the massive wrought iron gates. 4 heavily armed private security contractors, men who looked like they were fresh out of a mercenary camp, stood shoulder to shoulder blocking the entrance. Beyond the gates, I could see Ms. Clara, our family housekeeper of 20 years, standing on the sidewalk with tears streaming down her face. 2 of Preston goons were tossing her modest belongings onto the manicured lawn. I slammed on the brakes, throwing the car into park. I did not even wait for the engine to settle before I was out the door. Ms. Clara, I called out, rushing toward the older woman. Oh, Camille, baby, she sobbed, clutching her purse. Mr. Preston showed up an hour ago. He said your daddy passed. He said I was fired and gave me 5 minutes to get out. It is okay, Ms. Clara, I said, pulling her into a hug. My father is very much alive, and nobody is firing you. One of the security guards stepped forward, putting a massive hand up. Ma'am, this property is under private lockdown by order of the estate executor. You need to step back. I am Camille Vance. This is my father home, I stated, my voice echoing in the crisp morning air. Just then, the front doors of the mansion swung open. Preston strutted out wearing a custom Italian suit, holding a steaming cup of tea as if he owned the world. Bianca trailed behind him, wearing oversized designer sunglasses, aggressively typing on her phone, desperately trying to keep up the appearance of a grieving wealthy heiress. I told you not to come here, Camille, Preston yelled from the porch, flashing a smug, predatory smile. The estate belongs to the trust now, and I control the trust. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Yes, this is Preston Hayes. I have an aggressive trespasser at the Vance estate. Please send a squad car immediately. I was playing the ultimate card. A wealthy white man calling the Atlanta police on a black woman standing outside a mansion. He knew exactly what he was doing. He expected me to panic, to yell, to make a scene so the cops would drag me away in handcuffs, solidifying his narrative that I was the unstable, estranged daughter. I did not flinch. I crossed my arms and waited. Within 3 minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. 2 police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. 3 officers stepped out, their hands resting cautiously on their belts as they assessed the scene. The private security, the crying housekeeper Preston smirking on the porch, and me standing my ground. Officers. Preston called out, walking down the steps, with practiced ease, utilizing his best concerned citizen voice. Thank you for coming so quickly. This woman is my sister-in-law. My father-in-law tragically passed away last night. She is estranged, mentally unstable, and is now trespassing on trust property. I need her removed. The lead officer, a stern-looking veteran, approached me. Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to step away from the gates. Officer, I said calmly, not breaking eye contact with Preston. This man is presenting fraudulent documents. The owner of this property is not dead. Preston laughed, a harsh, condescending sound. Officers, please. She is in denial. I have the death certificate right here. He waved a piece of paper he had pulled from his jacket pocket. I am a licensed attorney and the executor of the estate. You are a fraud, a deep voice rumbled from behind me. The heavy door of my SUV swung open. My father, Marcus Vance, stepped out. He was still wearing his hospital scrubs under a heavy overcoat, but his posture was as rigid as steel. The blood drained from Preston's face so fast he looked translucent. Bianca let out a high-pitched shriek, dropping her phone onto the concrete steps where the screen shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. Dad, Bianca whispered, gripping the porch railing to keep from collapsing. The police officers looked from Preston's death certificate to my very much alive father. The lead officer frowned, his hand dropping from his belt. Mr. Vance, sir, we were told you passed. As you can see, officer reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Dad said, walking slowly but purposefully toward the gate. He stopped right in front of the private security guards who nervously stepped aside. No one in Atlanta disrespected Marcus Vance. Dad looked at the lead officer. Officer Williams, how is your wife doing? Did that bakery business of hers finally get off the ground? The officer's eyes widened in recognition. Yes, sir. Thanks to the small business grant your foundation provided. Good, Dad said before pointing a finger directly at Preston. Then you will be happy to assist me in removing this trespasser from my property. Preston began to hyperventilate. This is a mistake, the hospital told us. You did not wait for the hospital to tell you anything, Preston, I cut in, stepping up beside my father. I pulled a thick legal folder from my bag. Officers, this is a federally mandated medical directive and a temporary restraining order issued by a federal judge exactly 20 minutes ago, stripping Preston Hayes of all legal, financial, and physical proximity to Marcus Vance and his assets. Furthermore, I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for maximum impact. I looked over my shoulder as a sleek black town car pulled into the driveway behind the police cruisers. I believe you know the chief of police, I said. Chief Henderson stepped out of the town car. He was not just the head of the police department, he was my father's fraternity brother from their days at Morehouse College. They had bled together, built this city together, and protected each other for 40 years. Marcus, Chief Henderson said, shaking his head as he approached the gate. Camille called me, said you had a rat infestation at the house. That we do, Chief, Dad said, his eyes locked on Preston. Preston backed up the steps, grabbing Bianca's arm. You cannot do this. The wire transfer is already processing. The company is mine. Is it? I smiled, a slow, predatory grin. Check your phone, Preston. Because while you were busy playing estate executor, I was busy tracking your offshore accounts. Preston's hands shook as he fumbled for his phone. I watched the exact second his reality shattered. The blood vanished from his face completely. The offshore holding account he had meticulously set up, using a labyrinth of dummy corporations to hide his stolen assets, displayed a balance of exactly $0.00. Where is it? He choked out. Where is the $50 million? It is resting safely in a federal escrow account, I replied. Wiring $50 million using emergency protocols triggers an automatic audit at Vanguard Forensic Accounting. Since I am a senior partner, the alert came directly to my desk. I flagged your entire routing network. Bianca snatched the phone, her eyes wide. Preston, what is she talking about? Where is our money? It was never your money, Bianca, Dad said, his voice thick with disappointment. Chief, get these two off my property. Now. Marcus, wait. Preston pleaded as officers grabbed his arms. The board still needs to meet on Monday. You are medically compromised. I will see you in the boardroom, Preston, Dad said, turning his back. If you still have the guts. Police escorted my sister and her husband off the Buckhead estate, leaving them standing on the curb. Monday morning, inside the Vance Logistics skyscraper, the air was freezing. The executive boardroom was a battlefield. Dad sat at the mahogany table, projecting absolute authority. I sat to his right, a leather briefcase resting quietly. Opposite us sat Preston, flanked by Bianca and 3 board members who resented taking orders from a black self-made billionaire. Preston had spent the weekend calling in favors, convinced he could pull off a corporate coup. Let us stop wasting time, Preston began, slapping a folder down. Marcus, you suffered a heart attack. The board has the right to vote on a temporary transfer of power if the chief executive officer is incapacitated. I have the votes. You need to step down. I am sitting right here, Preston, Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. I am perfectly capable. Arthur, a dissenting board member, chimed in nervously. We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders. Preston has a transition plan that ensures market stability. Bianca leaned forward, smirking. Camille, take Dad home. You are just a forensic accountant. You do not understand high-level corporate transitions. I know what is best for Vance Logistics. I did not react to the insult. I simply popped the latches on my briefcase. You are right, Bianca, I said calmly, sliding a stack of bound dossiers down the table. I am just a forensic accountant. I do not care about your country club transitions. I only care about the math. And the math here is fascinating. Preston glared at the dossier. What is this nonsense, Camille? It is a detailed tracing of the Vanguard audit, I explained. For the past 2 years, Preston has been systematically siphoning funds from the Vance Logistics Employee Pension Fund. He routed the money through shell companies disguised as vendor payouts. The board members blanched, frantically flipping open their copies of the dossier. The detailed spreadsheets, wire transfer receipts, and protocol logs were undeniable. This is fabricated, Preston shouted, slamming his fist on the table. You forged these documents to protect your father. I did not forge anything, I replied smoothly. You were arrogant enough to use the same offshore routing numbers you use for your private wealth clients. But here's the most interesting part, Preston. I looked directly at my sister, whose smug expression was melting into sheer terror. She had always thought she was untouchable, but the reality of her husband's greed was crashing down on her. Preston did not put his own name on the primary shell company, I said. He knew that if the authorities ever caught wind of the embezzlement, the paper trail could not lead back to him. So he incorporated the holding company under a different name. I paused, letting the tension stretch. Turn to page 42 of the financial disclosure, Bianca, I commanded. Trembling, my sister flipped to the designated page. It was a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for the entity that had stolen nearly $20 million from the pension fund. Right there on the signature line was Bianca's name. No, Bianca gasped, the color draining from her face. She looked at Preston with betrayal. Preston, what is this? You told me I was signing paperwork for our new vacation home. Shut up, Bianca, Preston hissed, his entire body rigid with panic. You set me up! Bianca shrieked, standing up so fast her chair crashed onto the floor. You put the stolen money in my name. That is right, Bianca, I said. If Preston goes down for corporate fraud, you go down as the primary beneficiary and sole owner of the shell company. He made sure you would take the fall. You are looking at 20 years in federal prison. The 3 board members immediately stood up, grabbing their briefcases. Marcus, we had no idea, Arthur stammered. We rescind our motion. They practically ran out of the boardroom, leaving Preston and Bianca entirely alone. Preston glared at me. He was cornered, but men like him always had a backup plan. He let out a menacing chuckle. You think you have won, Camille, Preston sneered. You think this is just about some pension fund. You have no idea who you are messing with. That $20 million was not just sitting in an account. It was collateral. Collateral for what Dad demanded. Preston leaned over the table, his eyes locking onto mine. I owe $20 million to a syndicate operating out of Miami. They do not care about audits or federal courts. If they do not get their money by Friday, they are not just going to kill me, they are going to take it out on the entire Vance family. You did not save the company, Camille. You just signed your own death warrants. Preston's hands shook as he fumbled for his phone. I watched the exact second his reality shattered. The blood vanished from his face completely. The offshore holding account he had meticulously set up, using a labyrinth of dummy corporations to hide his stolen assets, displayed a balance of exactly $0.00. Where is it? He choked out. Where is the $50 million? It is resting safely in a federal escrow account, I replied. Wiring $50 million using emergency protocols triggers an automatic audit at Vanguard Forensic Accounting. Since I am a senior partner, the alert came directly to my desk. I flagged your entire routing network. Bianca snatched the phone, her eyes wide. Preston, what is she talking about? Where is our money? It was never your money, Bianca, Dad said, his voice thick with disappointment. Chief, get these 2 off my property, now. Marcus, wait, Preston pleaded as officers grabbed his arms. The board still needs to meet on Monday. You are medically compromised. I will see you in this boardroom, Preston, Dad said, turning his back. If you still have the guts. Police escorted my sister and her husband off the Buckhead estate, leaving them standing on the curb. Monday morning inside the Vance Logistics skyscraper, the air was freezing. The executive boardroom was a battlefield. Dad sat at the mahogany table, projecting absolute authority. I sat to his right, a leather briefcase resting quietly. Opposite us sat Preston, flanked by Bianca and 3 board members who resented taking orders from a black self-made billionaire. Preston had spent the weekend calling in favors, convinced he could pull off a corporate coup. Let us stop wasting time. Preston began slapping a folder down. Marcus, you suffered a heart attack. The board has the right to vote on a temporary transfer of power if the chief executive officer is incapacitated. I have the votes. You need to step down. I am sitting right here, Preston, Dad said, his voice low and dangerous. I am perfectly capable. Arthur, a dissenting board member, chimed in nervously. We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders. Preston has a transition plan that ensures market stability. Bianca leaned forward, smirking. Camille, take Dad home. You are just a forensic accountant. You do not understand high-level corporate transitions. I know what is best for Vance Logistics. I did not react to the insult. I simply popped the latches on my briefcase. You are right, Bianca, I said calmly, sliding a stack of bound dossiers down the table. I am just a forensic accountant. I do not care about your country club transitions. I only care about the math. And the math here is fascinating. Preston glared at the dossier. What is this nonsense, Camille? It is a detailed tracing of the Vanguard audit, I explained. For the past 2 years, Preston has been systematically siphoning funds from the Vance Logistics Employee Pension Fund. He routed the money through shell companies disguised as vendor payouts. The board members blanched frantically, flipping open their copies of the dossier. The detailed spreadsheets, wire transfer receipts, and protocol logs were undeniable. This is fabricated, Preston shouted, slamming his fist on the table. You forged these documents to protect your father. I did not forge anything, I replied smoothly. You were arrogant enough to use the same offshore routing numbers you use for your private wealth clients. But here's the most interesting part, Preston. I looked directly at my sister, whose smug expression was melting into sheer terror. She had always thought she was untouchable, but the reality of her husband's greed was crashing down on her. Preston did not put his own name on the primary shell company, I said. He knew that if the authorities ever caught wind of the embezzlement, the paper trail could not lead back to him. So he incorporated the holding company under a different name. I paused, letting the tension stretch. Turn to page 42 of the financial disclosure, Bianca, I commanded. Trembling, my sister flipped to the designated page. It was a copy of the Articles of Incorporation for the entity that had stolen nearly $20 million from the pension fund. Right there on the signature line was Bianca's name. No, Bianca gasped, the color draining from her face. She looked at Preston with betrayal. Preston, what is this? You told me I was signing paperwork for our new vacation home. Shut up, Bianca, Preston hissed, his entire body rigid with panic. You set me up! Bianca shrieked, standing up so fast her chair crashed onto the floor. You put the stolen money in my name. That is right, Bianca, I said. If Preston goes down for corporate fraud, you go down as the primary beneficiary and sole owner of the shell company. He made sure you would take the fall. You are looking at 20 years in federal prison. The 3 board members immediately stood up, grabbing their briefcases. Marcus, we had no idea, Arthur stammered. We rescind our motion. They practically ran out of the boardroom, leaving Preston and Bianca entirely alone. Preston glared at me. He was cornered, but men like him always had a backup plan. He let out a menacing chuckle. You think you have won, Camille, Preston sneered. You think this is just about some pension fund. You have no idea who you are messing with. That $20 million was not just sitting in an account. It was collateral. Collateral for what Dad demanded. Preston leaned over the table, his eyes locking onto mine. I owe $20 million to a syndicate operating out of Miami. They do not care about audits or federal courts. If they do not get their money by Friday, they are not just going to kill me, they are going to take it out on the entire Vance family. You did not save the company, Camille. You just signed your own death warrants. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Not a single breath could be heard over the hum of the air conditioning. Preston stood there with his chest heaving, his designer suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. He had just threatened the lives of everyone in my family, and he expected us to cower. He expected my father to hand over $1 billion logistics empire to save our skins. Dad did not flinch. He placed both hands flat on the mahogany table and leaned forward, his dark eyes piercing through Preston. You think a threat from some Miami street thugs is going to make me surrender the legacy I built for my daughters? Dad asked, his voice vibrating with lethal calm. I grew up in the Jim Crow South Preston. I have faced monsters you could not even comprehend. You brought a dog to a lion fight. Bianca let out a strangled sob, clutching her stomach as she backed away from her husband. You promised me we were safe, she cried. You told me the Vanguard audit was just a routine check. You lied to me, Preston. You put a target on my back. Preston grabbed her arm, roughly silencing her. Shut up, Bianca. He snapped his attention back to me. You have 48 hours, Camille. The men I owe money to do not send warning letters. They send heavily armed debt collectors. If you do not release the federal hold on that $50 million by Friday morning, they will start dismantling this family piece by piece. First your reputation, then your assets, and then your lives. Release the hold, I repeated, stepping around the table until I was standing inches from him. You clearly do not understand how a federal escrow account works, Preston. I do not have a magical button that overrides the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You committed wire fraud. The money is seized. Even if I wanted to pay your ransom, the funds are locked in a government vault. Preston's face contorted in pure panic. He realized his master plan had a fatal flaw. He assumed I had merely intercepted the transfer internally. He did not realize I had handed the entire routing network over to the authorities. Then you will drain the corporate operational accounts, Preston demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. You will liquidate whatever assets you have to. I am the only one who knows the contact protocols for the syndicate. If you do not pay them through me, they will assume you stole the money. You need me. I need you to get out of my building, Dad commanded, pressing the security button under the conference table. Before I have the guards throw you through the plate glass window. Two massive security personnel entered the room immediately. Preston raised his hands, stepping back toward the glass doors. You are making a mistake, Marcus. You are signing your own death warrant. He looked at Bianca, who was trembling against the wall. Are you coming, or are you staying with the people who just ruined our lives? Bianca looked at me with pure hatred. She did not blame the man who had stolen millions and endangered her life. She blamed the sister who caught him. I am leaving, Bianca hissed, grabbing her designer bag. This is your fault, Camille. If you had just stayed out of it, we would have been fine. I watched them walk out, escorted by security. The moment the heavy oak doors clicked shut, Dad sank heavily into his leather chair. His hand went to his chest, right over his heart. Dad, I rushed to his side, pulling a small bottle of his emergency medication from my pocket. Take this. Breathe. He swallowed the pill dry, closing his eyes for a moment. The color was slow to return to his face, but his breathing eventually steadied. I am fine, Camille. I am just angry. Angry at myself for letting that parasite into our family. You could not have known, Dad. Preston manipulated everyone. He weaponized Bianca's insecurities and used her as a human shield. But we cannot focus on that right now. We have a syndicate to neutralize. How do we fight a ghost organization? Camille, Dad asked, opening his eyes. They operate in the shadows. Nobody operates completely in the shadows, I said, opening my laptop. Criminal syndicates need logistics to move their money. They need shipping routes, warehouses, and clean corporate fronts. They need exactly the kind of infrastructure Vance Logistics provides, which is why Preston targeted us in the first place. He was not just stealing pension funds. He was trying to acquire your company to use as a massive money laundering machine. I pulled up the Vanguard encrypted database. Preston is a wealth manager. He is arrogant and he is lazy. He reused the same offshore routing numbers for the stolen pension funds that he used for his wealthy clients. If I run a trace on those specific routing protocols, I can identify the shell companies the Miami syndicate uses. Dad watched the screen as lines of code and financial data began cascading downward. What happens when you find them? I do not just find them, I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I freeze them. I expose their domestic operations to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. If I dismantle their domestic money laundering apparatus, I take away their leverage. But I cannot do it alone. The federal system takes too long to process corporate subpoenas. I need immediate access to their banking records. I picked up my phone and opened a highly secured group chat. It contained 12 contacts. They were all Black women. They were all Spelman College alumni. And they were all senior executives at the top financial institutions in the country, from hedge fund managers in New York to banking regulators in Washington. This was my network. The real power Preston had completely underestimated. I typed a quick message. Sisters, I have a rogue wealth manager trying to launder syndicate money through Vance Logistics. I have his offshore routing numbers. I need domestic matching accounts and I need them yesterday. Within seconds, the replies began pouring in. One from a vice president at a major national bank. Send the routing numbers, Camille. I am running them through the domestic fraud alert system right now. Another reply came from a compliance director in Miami. I have eyes on the ground here. Give me the corporate entity names. I will flag their operating licenses before lunch. I looked at Dad and gave him a reassuring nod. Preston thought he was playing chess against a simple bookkeeper. He did not realize he just declared war on a network of the most powerful financial minds in the country. But the battle was far from over. My phone buzzed again this time with a notification from a social media platform. My heart sank as I read the headline. Bianca had just gone live on her massive social media account. She was crying, holding a tissue to her face, spinning a horrific tale about how her cruel sister was manipulating their sick father to steal her inheritance. Preston was cornered, but Bianca was launching a public smear campaign to destroy my credibility before I could destroy his syndicate. The war had just spilled out of the boardroom and into the public eye. I clicked the notification on my screen, and the video expanded. Bianca was sitting in her immaculate kitchen, wiping away perfectly orchestrated tears with a silk tissue. She was wearing her signature pearl necklace, the universal symbol of her elite sorority status. Her makeup was minimal, just enough to make her look exhausted and devastated. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I never thought my own sister would use my father's recent medical emergency to seize control of his legacy, Bianca said to the camera, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. My husband and I have spent years trying to protect Vance Logistics. Now Camille is locking us out of the estate and freezing our accounts. Please pray for my family during this spiritual warfare. The comments section was a waterfall of sympathy from Atlanta high society. Wives of politicians, mega church pastors, and real estate moguls were sending prayers and outrage. Bianca was not just complaining to strangers. She was weaponizing the Black elite of Atlanta against me. In our world, reputation was currency, and Bianca was bankrupting mine. She did not stop at social media. By noon, the prayer chain at Greater Hope Fellowship, our family church for 3 decades, was fully activated. The pastor wife posted a lengthy message on her own page about praying for Bianca to find peace while her sister succumbed to the devil temptations. My phone began vibrating violently against the mahogany conference table. Text messages flooded in from cousins, aunts, and former classmates. Some demanded explanations, while others simply expressed their profound disappointment in me. They called me a thief, a traitor, and a disgrace to the Vance name. Dad watched the broadcast over my shoulder. His jaw tightened, and the monitor displaying his heart rate on his smartwatch beeped a warning. The betrayal from his eldest daughter was a heavier blow than the cardiac arrest he had survived 2 nights ago. Do not look at it, Dad, I said gently, turning my laptop screen away. She is trying to force our hand. Preston knows he cannot beat us in a financial audit, so he is letting Bianca use her social capital to destroy our credibility. They want the board of directors to panic over the public relations disaster and force a settlement. I need to issue a statement, Dad said, rubbing his chest. I need to tell the church and the community that she is lying. No, I insisted, standing up and pouring him a glass of water. If you issue a statement, you validate her narrative. You turn this into a reality television show. Let her talk. We are not fighting a public relations war. We are fighting a financial war. I needed to get my father out of the corporate building and back to the secure estate where he could rest. I also needed to pick up his specific low-sodium groceries and his new prescriptions. I left him with his private security team and drove to the upscale grocery market in Buckhead. I knew going out in public was a risk, but I refused to hide. I walked down the aisles with my head held high, projecting the absolute confidence of a woman with nothing to hide. But Atlanta society is a small, interconnected web. It did not take long for the whispers to start. As I was selecting fresh produce, I noticed three women standing near the organic section. They were wearing their sorority colors, holding designer handbags, and glaring at me. One of them was Mrs. Dubois, a formidable church elder, and the woman who had sponsored Bianca membership into her exclusive organization years ago. Mrs. Dubois marched directly toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The other two women flanked her like loyal soldiers. Camille Vance, Mrs. Dubois, said, her voice loud enough to turn heads in the adjacent aisles. I cannot believe you have the audacity to show your face in public. Your poor sister is falling apart, and your father is lying in a hospital bed, while you try to steal the company he built. My father is resting comfortably at home, I replied, my tone completely devoid of emotion. You should not believe everything you watch on the internet, Mrs. Dubois. Do not patronize me, child, she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. We all know you were always jealous of Bianca. She married well, she carries herself with grace, and she honors the community. You are bringing shame to your family legacy. You need to repent and return what you have stolen before God strikes you down. I looked at the three women. They felt so powerful standing there armed with gossip and misplaced self-righteousness. They thought they were defending a victim. They had no idea they were providing cover for a criminal syndicate. Mrs. Dubois, I said, stepping closer so she had to look up to meet my eyes. Your husband's construction firm just secured a massive contracting deal with Apex Holdings. That is the commercial real estate company Preston manages. I suggest you have a very thorough conversation with your husband tonight. Because when the federal indictments come down on Friday, the FBI will be seizing every asset connected to Preston shell companies. That includes the construction contracts. The color vanished from Mrs. Dubois' face. Her hand dropped slowly to her side. I suggest you review your own family finances before you pray for my soul, I added smoothly, turning back to my shopping cart. Have a blessed day, ladies. I walked away, leaving them standing in stunned silence. The encounter confirmed exactly what I suspected. Preston was not just laundering money for a Miami syndicate. He was using his stolen funds to buy influence within the Atlanta elite. He was granting lucrative contracts and investment opportunities to the husbands of Bianca's sorority sisters and church friends. He was paying for their loyalty with dirty money. I returned to the Buckhead estate with the groceries and medications. Dad was sitting in the private library, staring at the muted television screen. The local business news networks were already running segments on the Vance family feud. The ticker at the bottom of the screen showed that Vance Logistics stock had dipped 4% since the market opened. The smear campaign was working exactly as Preston intended. It was creating instability. He is trying to smoke us out, Dad said without looking away from the screen. He wants the shareholders to panic, so they forced me to step down and put him back in charge to calm the markets. He is underestimating us, I said, setting the grocery bags down and opening my laptop on the heavy oak desk. Preston thinks we are going to fight back with press releases and angry social media posts. He thinks we are going to play his game. What are you going to do? Camille, Dad asked, finally turning to look at me. I am going to follow the money, I said, pulling up the encrypted chat with my network of financial executives. Preston bought the loyalty of Bianca friends with stolen pension funds. I am going to find every single contracting deal, every fraudulent loan, and every fake investment he handed out to this community. When I am done, the same people defending Bianca today will be begging for mercy tomorrow. I pulled out my secondary laptop, the one dedicated entirely to encrypted communications, and set it next to the primary monitor on my father's desk. The war room was officially open. I poured myself a black cup of coffee, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that always accompanied a deep dive forensic audit. I opened the secure messaging application that connected me directly to my alumni network. My Spellman sisters were already active. These were not just social acquaintances or casual friends. They were brilliant women who commanded the trading floors of Wall Street, the compliance departments of federal banks, and the risk management divisions of global real estate firms. We shared a bond forged in the fires of an institution that demanded excellence and fierce loyalty. I had saved several of them from corporate sabotage early in our careers, untangling financial messes created by incompetent male executives who tried to use them as scapegoats. Now I was calling in my markers. I typed a precise directive into the encrypted chat. Sisters, the target is Preston Hayes and his umbrella corporation Apex Holdings. I need a comprehensive web of his local Atlanta transactions over the last 48 months. Look for commercial real estate liens, unsecured personal loans to high net worth individuals, and overlapping vendor contracts with Vance Logistics. Leave no stone unturned. Find me the exact leverage he holds over this city. The response was immediate. Spreadsheets and encrypted data dumps began flowing into my secure server. Maya, a vice president at a major commercial bank in Charlotte, flagged a series of severe irregularities. Chloe, a senior compliance officer in Chicago, started cross-referencing the tax identification numbers. They worked with ruthless efficiency, stripping away the layers of corporate camouflage Preston had used to hide his activities. Hours blurred together as I sifted through the financial wreckage. Preston had been incredibly busy. I was not just stealing from my father pension fund to launder money for the Miami syndicate. He was running an elaborate Ponzi scheme right here in Buckhead. He had systematically targeted the most vocal members of Bianca's social circle, the pastors, the society matrons, the local politicians. Preston had offered them exclusive investment opportunities, promising massive returns that seemed too good to be true. But the contracts they signed were laced with predatory clauses and hidden liabilities. I pulled up the property deed to Reverend Thomas Megachurch. Preston had quietly acquired the secondary mortgage through a shell company. I looked at the commercial lease for the Dubois construction firm. Preston held a toxic lion that gave him the power to liquidate their assets if they missed a single payment or violated his arbitrary terms. He had weaponized his proximity to the Vance family wealth to convince these people he was a financial genius. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. They thought they were defending a grieving daughter and a brilliant wealth manager. They did not realize they were fiercely protecting their own loan shark. Preston owned them. If he went down and his shell companies collapsed, their personal fortunes would be dragged into federal bankruptcy court alongside him. That was exactly why they were smearing me so aggressively on social media and from the pulpit. They were terrified of losing their country club memberships, their luxury cars, and their pristine public images. I turned the monitor toward my father, who had been quietly making calls to his loyal warehouse managers, ensuring the physical assets of Vance Logistics remained secure. "Look at this, Dad," I said, pointing to the glowing spreadsheet illuminating the dark corners of Atlanta elite society. Preston has infected the entire community. He leveraged stolen company funds to issue high-interest loans to Bianca friends. They are acting as his human shields right now because he holds the deeds to their homes and businesses. Dad leaned in his eyes, scanning the endless rows of financial data. He recognized names immediately. The very people who had smiled at his dinner table and prayed with him on Sundays were listed as debtors to a man who despised them. The betrayal etched new lines into my father's face, but the sadness quickly morphed into a cold, calculating resolve. "They think they can use my community against my own flesh and blood." Dad rumbled, his voice regaining its full, terrifying strength. "They think they can throw you to the wolves to protect their dirty investments and maintain their fake lifestyles. It is time to remind them exactly who feeds this city and who built the tables they eat from." Dad stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling estate. "Call your Aunt Vivian," he ordered without turning around. "Tell her we are hosting a traditional Sunday dinner tomorrow afternoon. Tell her to invite the entire extended family and every prominent church elder who has had something to say about you on the internet today. Tell them I am making a major announcement about the future of the company." "A Sunday dinner?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Dad, we are in the middle of a corporate hijacking and a federal fraud investigation. We do not have time for macaroni and cheese and collard greens. We need to be preparing legal injunctions." "We have time for a reckoning," Dad replied, turning back to face me with a smile that matched my own predatory grin. "Preston and Bianca want to play to the audience. Let us give them an audience. We are going to invite every single person Preston has defrauded right into my dining room. We will serve them a beautiful meal, and then you are going to serve them the financial truth. I want to see the look on his face when his human shields realize he has led them straight to the slaughterhouse. I nodded, my fingers flying across the keyboard to finalize the data packets. I compiled every deed, every toxic lien, and every fraudulent wire transfer into a seamless presentation. I loaded the files onto a secure encrypted flash drive. Tomorrow, the Black Elite of Atlanta would arrive at the Vance estate expecting a display of family drama and weakness. They expected me to beg for forgiveness or fold under their collective pressure. Instead, they were going to get a masterclass in forensic destruction. I closed my laptop with a satisfying snap. Sunday dinner was going to be an absolute bloodbath. Sunday afternoon arrived with the suffocating heat typical of Georgia in July. The Buckhead estate was transformed into a staging ground of immaculate Southern hospitality. Ms. Clara had outdone herself directing the catering team. The long mahogany dining table groaned under the weight of crystal decanters, silver platters of fried chicken, collard greens, baked macaroni and cheese, and prime rib. By 3 o'clock, the driveway was packed with luxury vehicles. Aunt Vivian arrived first, wearing her Sunday best and a scowl reserved exclusively for me. She was followed by Uncle Gerald, Pastor Williams, and a half-dozen other extended family members and church elders. They filed into the grand foyer, whispering and casting sideways glances in my direction. I greeted them with perfect manners, offering sweet tea and directing them to the dining room. I refused to let their icy reception break my composure. Bianca and Preston made their grand entrance 20 minutes late. Bianca wore a modest floral dress, clutching a tissue and looking like a martyr walking to the gallows. Preston trailed beside her, exuding repulsive arrogance. He smirked at the security guards and practically swaggered into the dining room, taking a seat near the head of the table. He truly believed he had won. He thought my father's invitation was a white flag of surrender. Dad took his place at the head of the table. He looked sharp, wearing a tailored suit that hid any lingering signs of his cardiac event. The meal began with a prayer from Pastor Williams, asking for healing peace and the restoration of family bonds. I knew exactly what he meant. He was praying for me to fall in line. A's plates were passed and wine was poured. The polite facade began to crack. Aunt Vivian set her fork down and locked eyes with me. Camille, she started, her tone dripping with condescension. We have all been very troubled by the rumors circulating this weekend. Your sister has been crying non-stop. You need to drop this hostile takeover nonsense and apologize. Uncle Gerald chimed in, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. Your father built this empire with blood and sweat. Preston is a top-tier wealth manager. He brought institutional legitimacy to the Vance name. Bianca married well, and she represents this family with grace. You cannot just lock them out because you feel inadequate about your own life choices. We have to maintain our standing in this community. The chorus of disapproval swelled around the table. They praised Bianca for her elegant lifestyle, her philanthropic appearances, and her picture-perfect marriage. They praised Preston for elevating a black family into the upper echelons of Atlanta white corporate society. They looked at me as the bitter unmarried sister who wanted to tear down their golden couple out of sheer jealousy. Bianca dabbed her eyes, pressing her advantage. I want our family to be whole again, she sniffled, looking around the table to gather sympathy. I have sacrificed so much to keep the Vance name spotless. I serve on the charity boards, I host the galas, and I make sure we are respected in the circles that matter. Camille has always hated me for it. She hates that I fit in and she does not. She is using daddy illness to punish me. I sat quietly, taking a slow sip of my water, letting them dig their graves deeper. Emboldened by the vocal support of the elders, Preston leaned back in his chair, swirling his expensive bourbon. You see, Marcus, Preston said, addressing my father with blatant disrespect. Your generation simply does not understand modern wealth management. You built a nice little trucking company, but I am the one who knows how to navigate global capital. Camille is throwing a temper tantrum because she plays with spreadsheets all day and thinks she understands high finance. You need to call off your attack dogs and sign the transition papers before the markets open tomorrow. I am the future of this family. Preston scoffed. Let us be brutally honest here. Camille went to a nice little historically black college and learned how to balance a ledger. I went to Wharton. I manage portfolios that exceed the GDP of small island nations. The only reason Vance Logistics is even relevant in the modern corporate sphere is because my signature is on your compliance documents. I shielded this family from federal scrutiny when your antiquated business models were bleeding cash. I brought you into the 21st century. Aunt Vivian nodded enthusiastically. He is right, Marcus. We cannot let pride ruin what Preston has built for us. He has doubled the value of my own personal portfolio in just 3 years. We trust him. You trust a mirage, Aunt Vivian, I said, speaking for the first time since the meal began. You trust a man who smiles at you in church while picking your pocket in the dark. How dare you speak to your elders that way, Uncle Gerald shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You have lost your mind, Camille. You are so blinded by your inferiority complex that you are willing to destroy the very man who is keeping this family relevant. We will not sit here and let you insult Preston. The entire room fell silent at Preston's audacious tone. No one spoke to Marcus Vance that way, especially not in his own house at his own dining table. Dad slowly placed his knife and fork on his china plate. He did not yell. He did not stand up. He simply stared at Preston with eyes as cold and deep as the ocean. I am the one holding all the keys, Preston continued. I have the board members, the community, and the financial leverage. Bianca is the rightful heir to the social capital of this family. Camille is nothing but a disruption. You need me, Marcus. Without me, you will fall. My father did not blink. He just looked at me and nodded. I stood up from my chair, picking up a small black remote from the sideboard. I pressed a button and the heavy velvet curtains at the far end of the dining room automatically drew shut. A motorized projector screen descended from the ceiling, masking the portrait of my great-grandfather. Preston chuckled nervously, adjusting his tie. What is this, Camille? A slideshow? Are you going to bore us with tax codes? I am going to show you exactly how Preston brought this family into the 21st century, I said, pressing the next button on the remote. The projector flared to life, illuminating the darkened room with a high-definition spreadsheet. It was not a corporate ledger. It was a personal wealth management statement. Aunt Vivian squinted at the screen, her glasses slipping down her nose. That is my portfolio, she said, her voice laced with confusion. How did you get my private financial records? Because Preston routed your private financial records through the Vance Logistics server to bypass federal scrutiny, I replied, my voice echoing in the quiet room. You mentioned earlier that Preston doubled the value of your portfolio in 3 years, Aunt Vivian. Let us look closely at how he achieved that miracle. I clicked the remote, highlighting a specific column in stark red. I did not double your investments, I continued. He leveraged your entire retirement fund as collateral for a high-risk offshore loan. The money you see on your quarterly statements is a phantom balance. Your actual cash was drained 18 months ago to cover his losses in a shell company. You are currently leveraged at 300%. If the market dips even slightly, you lose everything, including your house. Aunt Vivian dropped her fork. The clatter of silver against china sounded like a gunshot. That is a lie, she gasped, turning to Preston. Tell her she is lying, Preston. Preston opened his mouth, but no words came out. I did not give him time to formulate an excuse. I clicked the remote again, bringing up a commercial deed. Uncle Gerald, I said, turning my attention to the man who had just defended Preston with such vigor. You own the largest black-owned automotive dealership in Atlanta. You trusted Preston to manage your commercial expansion loans. Look at the screen. Uncle Gerald leaned forward, his eyes widening in horror. That is the deed to my flagship dealership. Why does it show a secondary lien held by Apex Holdings? Apex Holdings is Preston Shadow Corporation, I explained. When he processed your expansion loan, he buried a toxic balloon payment clause in the fine print. He essentially gave himself the right to seize your property if you miss a single technical compliance metric. He does not just manage your money, Uncle Gerald. He owns your business, and he has been using your dealership as collateral to borrow millions from unlicensed lenders in South Florida. The dining room erupted into chaos. Uncle Gerald stood up his chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Aunt Vivian grabbed her chest, struggling to breathe. But I was not finished. Pastor Williams, I called out, cutting through the yelling. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was suffocating. I clicked to the final slide, a scanned document bearing the seal of Greater Hope Fellowship. Preston offered to manage the church building fund for the new community center, I said. He told this congregation he was doing it pro bono. But what he actually did was take out a massive unauthorized mortgage against the church sanctuary itself. He took the congregation tithes and funneled them straight into his Ponzi scheme. If Preston goes bankrupt tomorrow, the bank will foreclose on Greater Hope Fellowship. He bet the house of God on a losing hand. Pastor William's face turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. He slowly looked at Preston. You mortgaged the church. You put the sanctuary where my grandfather preached in jeopardy for your own greed. Preston scrambled to stand, his composure completely shattered. Listen to me, everyone, he pleaded, his voice pitching high with panic. These are just numbers on a screen. Camille manipulated the data. I have total control of the assets. I can liquidate and make everyone whole by next week. You just need to give me time. Time to do what Uncle Gerald roared, marching toward Preston end of the table. Time to pack your bags and flee the country, you arrogant thief. You sat in my home, drank my whiskey, and told me you were protecting my legacy while you robbed me blind. Bianca jumped up, positioning herself between her husband and the furious relatives. Uncle Gerald, please, she cried, holding up her hands. Preston made a mistake, but he can fix it. Do not do this. We are family. Family, aunt. Vivian shrieked, her pristine image completely forgotten. You dare use that word. You brought a parasite into our lives, Bianca. You paraded around town in your designer clothes and hosted your fancy galas while your husband stripped us to the bone. You are just as complicit as he is. I did not know, Bianca sobbed, looking around the room for any sympathetic face. I swear I did not know what he was doing. You knew enough to put your name on the shell company, I reminded her coldly. You knew enough to leave Dad to die so you could steal his company. You just did not care where the money came from as long as it kept you in the spotlight. The very people who had spent the last hour defending Bianca and attacking me were now circling them like wolves. The social capital Bianca prized above all else evaporated in an instant. There were no prayers for her now, no sorority solidarity. There was only the primal rage of people who realized they had been betrayed and bankrupted. Preston backed away from the table, his eyes darting frantically toward the exits. The private security guards outside were no longer his. They answered only to Marcus Vance. He was trapped in a room full of people he had systematically ruined. Marcus Preston begged, turning to my father. You have to stop them. You have the capital to cover these loans. You can bail them out. If you let me go down, the scandal will drag the Vance name through the mud. Dad remained seated, his hands folded calmly on the table. He looked at the chaos unfolding in his dining room with utter detachment. My name is perfectly fine, Preston, Dad said quietly. I built my fortune with honest labor. You built yours with lies. And now you have to face the people you lied to. I highly suggest you start praying because Pastor Williams looks like he is ready to skip the sermon and go straight to the judgment. Uncle Gerald lunged forward, overturning his chair. Before his hands could wrap around Preston's throat, Dad raised a single finger. The two security guards immediately stepped between them, forming a human wall. We do not shed blood in my dining room, Dad said calmly. Escort Mr. Hayes off my property. Let the streets have him. The guards grabbed Preston by the arms and dragged him toward the foyer. Bianca stumbled after them, crying hysterically, her designer heels slipping on the polished marble floor. The heavy front doors slammed shut behind them, severing their ties to the Vance family forever. Inside the dining room, the outrage of my relatives shifted into a chaotic chorus of panic as they demanded to know how to save their homes and businesses. I left Dad to handle the fallout, taking my laptop and retreating to the war room. I knew Preston was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. Outside the estate, Preston shoved Bianca into the passenger seat of his luxury sedan and sped away, his tires screeching against the asphalt. He drove erratically, his mind racing to find a way out of the apocalypse I had just unleashed on him. His offshore accounts were frozen. His local victims were fully aware of his fraud. He had absolutely no leverage left. Then his burner phone rang. It was a secure satellite line. Preston pulled into an abandoned parking lot, his hands shaking so violently he could barely press the answer button. He held the phone to his ear, but did not speak. The voice on the other end was heavy with a thick Russian accent. It was cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of human empathy. "Mr. Hayes," the voice said, "we noticed your Cayman accounts are currently under federal lockdown. This is a very unfortunate development for you." "I can fix it," Preston stammered, sweat pouring down his face and soaking his expensive collar. "I just need a little more time. The federal regulators flagged a routing error, but I have secondary assets. I can liquidate them immediately." "You do not have time," Mr. Hayes, the voice interrupted. "You have 24 hours. $20 million must be cleared into our designated crypto wallet by tomorrow night. If the transfer fails, we will not call you again. We will simply send a cleaning crew to your home. We know where your wife sleeps. We know the addresses of the relatives you just had dinner with. Tomorrow night, Mr. Hayes. Do not disappoint us." The line went dead. Preston dropped the phone, his breathing ragged. He looked at Bianca, who was sobbing quietly against the window, completely useless to him now. He had one day to find $20 million in clean, untraceable cash. He could not borrow it. He could not steal it from the pension fund anymore. He had to sell something massive. Preston pulled out his primary phone and dialed a number he had sworn never to call unless it was an absolute emergency. It belonged to Richard Sterling, the ruthless chief executive of Sterling Freight. They were the largest logistics competitor in the Southeast, and Marcus Vance's oldest, bitterest rival. Sterling had spent the last decade trying to swallow Vance Logistics whole, but my father had always outmaneuvered him. Preston knew Sterling would pay anything for the keys to the kingdom, Richard Preston said as soon as the line connected, trying to mask his desperation with corporate confidence. "I have an unprecedented opportunity for you. I am officially executing the transition of Vance Logistics. Marcus is medically incapacitated, and I hold the proxy votes for the board." Sterling laughed, a dry, grating sound. "I heard Marcus had a heart attack, but I also heard he threw you out of a boardroom this morning, Preston. Why should I do business with a dead man walking?" "Because I still have the bearer shares." Preston lied, his mind working frantically. "Before they locked me out, I transferred 30% of the Vance corporate equity into an Apex holding company. I also have the master operational protocols and the client routing databases. If you combine my shares with a hostile buyout maneuver, you can seize majority control by tomorrow morning. I will sell you the entire package, everything you need to dismantle Marcus Vance's legacy overnight." Sterling went quiet, processing the magnitude of the offer. "What is your price?" $20 million, Preston demanded. "Cash equivalent routed through a decentralized crypto exchange. Non-negotiable. And the transfer has to happen tonight." $20 million is a fraction of what those shares and databases are worth. Sterling noted, his predatory instincts kicking in. "You must be in serious trouble, Preston. But I do not care about your problems. I only care about crushing Marcus. Bring the physical shares and the hard drives to my downtown office in 1 hour. If the data is authentic, you will have your crypto transfer." Preston hung up, slamming his hands against the steering wheel in a twisted moment of triumph. He thought he had found the ultimate loophole. The federal injunction I filed blocked him from accessing the bank accounts, but it had not yet physically voided the paper-bearer shares he had illegally hidden in his personal safe days ago. He was going to sell my father lifework for pennies on the dollar just to save his own skin. Back at the Buckhead estate, I was monitoring the dark web financial scanners I had set up to track Preston, remaining digital footprints. My Spellman network had established a digital perimeter around his social security number and corporate identifiers. Suddenly, my screen flashed red. A massive blockchain contract was being drafted between an anonymous wallet and a corporate entity registered to Sterling Freight. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the encrypted metadata. Preston was attempting a hostile takeover through the back door. I was selling stolen equity to our biggest rival. If Sterling executed that contract and took possession of those shares, he could legally paralyze our operations and force a liquidation of Vance Logistics before the courts could untangle the mess. Preston thought he could outrun the law by abandoning the banking system and moving into cryptocurrency. He thought he could sell a stolen empire to pay off a Russian syndicate. I cracked my knuckles and opened a new terminal window. He was about to find out that I did not just track bank accounts, I tracked everything. I locked the steel door of the primary server room. The ambient temperature was 60 degrees, protecting the humming towers of data, holding my father life work. I sat cross-legged on the reinforced floor, balancing the encrypted laptop on my knees. I had 45 minutes before Preston reached Richard Sterling downtown office. 45 minutes to dismantle a corporate sabotage before it was executed. I initiated a deep packet inspection on the blockchain contract Preston had drafted. Cryptocurrency is often misunderstood as entirely anonymous. It is pseudo-anonymous. Every transaction exists on a public ledger. If you know how to read the ledger, you can map the ecosystem. I deployed a specialized algorithm tracing the digital wallet Sterling planned to use to pay Preston. The wallet was obfuscated behind 3 decentralized exchanges. Fraudsters always make mistakes, prioritizing speed over hygiene when desperate. I found a microscopic footprint connecting the primary wallet to a corporate internet protocol address. I ran the address through the federal database. It belonged to a private firm registered in Cyprus. I frowned at the glowing computer screen. Richard Sterling was a ruthless businessman, but he hated offshore tech. Why would a traditional Southern logistics magnate keep $20 million in untraceable crypto managed by a Cypriot firm? It did not fit his profile. I opened a terminal cross-referencing the Cypriot firm board of directors. The names were mostly blank proxies, but the financial backers were listed. I pulled the routing numbers of those backers and fed them into the system I used to catch Preston today. The algorithm spun for an agonizing 3 minutes. The screen flashed green. Match found. The routing numbers funding Richard Sterling Holding Company were an exact match to the offshore accounts Preston had been using to launder money. It was the Russian syndicate operating out of Miami. The realization was a punch to the gut. Richard Sterling was not just a bitter rival trying to buy our company, he was a corporate puppet. The syndicate quietly bailed out Sterling Freight when they faced bankruptcy 2 years ago, pumping millions into his enterprise, turning his company into a laundering front. Sterling was a figurehead executing orders from the violent men Preston owed his life to. Preston thought he found a brilliant loophole selling the stolen equity to Sterling. He thought he was outsmarting the syndicate by using a rival to get their cash. He had no idea he was trying to sell the stolen goods directly to the very people he had stolen from. The syndicate was using Sterling to seize Vance Logistics for free. They never intended to pay him the $20 million. They intended to take the bearer shares and eliminate him. If the syndicate took physical possession of the 30% equity, they would have legal standing to gut our operations from the inside before federal authorities intervened. I needed a kill switch. I opened the Vance Master Registry. Preston physically stole the paper bearer shares, but in modern corporate governance, physical shares are worthless unless their serial numbers are actively validated by the internal registry system. I pulled up the cryptographic keys for the specific shares Preston stole. I could not simply delete them because that would trigger a board inquiry, but I could invalidate them through a compliance freeze. I drafted an emergency anti-money laundering protocol, tagging the stolen serial numbers as compromised assets linked to federal fraud investigations. I linked the internal flag directly to the federal database using my Vanguard credentials. If Sterling attempted to verify the shares to complete the transaction, the system would automatically reject the transfer and ping federal authorities with his exact location. The shares were now radioactive. I needed to ensure Preston did not panic and destroy the physical documents before I could reclaim them. I picked up my phone and dialed my lead security contractor at the estate. He answered almost immediately. "I need you to intercept a vehicle," I said, my voice echoing. "Preston Hayes is arriving at the Sterling Freight headquarters downtown. Do not let him inside. Do not engage him physically, but make sure he sees you. Spook him. Make him think we are closing in. Drive him away." "Understood, Ms. Vance," the contractor replied. "We will corral him." I hung up and exported the data packet containing the proof of Sterling ties to the Miami syndicate onto a secure hard drive. I now held the weapon that would obliterate our biggest corporate rival in one single strike. The door rattled. I unplugged the encrypted hard drive, slipping it into my pocket before opening the heavy steel door. My father stood in the hallway, flanked by Chief Henderson and 2 federal agents in dark suits. Dad looked down at me, his expression completely unreadable. You have been in here for an hour, Camille. Tell me you have something. I have everything, Dad, I said, stepping out of the freezing room. Preston is currently walking into a trap set by his own creditors. Richard Sterling is a front for the Miami syndicate. They are using him to acquire our company. But I just rendered the stolen shares completely useless and flagged Sterling's entire network for federal review. The agents exchanged glances. Ms. Vance, we need the exact location of Preston Hayes. The wire fraud warrants just cleared. We have authorization to bring him in. Hi is downtown, I said, handing the agent a slip of paper with the address. But do not arrest him yet. The agent frowned. Excuse me, he is a flight risk. Hi has nowhere to fly, I countered. I froze his offshore accounts. I tagged his stolen assets. His local network is being dismantled by my team. If you arrest him now, you get one corrupt wealth manager. If you wait 2 hours and follow the data on this encrypted drive, you get Preston Hayes, Richard Sterling, and the entire Miami syndicate operating inside Atlanta. Chief Henderson looked at the drive, then looked at my father, letting out a low whistle. Marcus, your daughter does not just play chess, she owns the board. Dad smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. I raised her right. I looked down at my phone. My security contractor had just sent a message. Target intercepted outside Sterling headquarters. He panicked and fled. We are tracking him northbound on the interstate. Hi is heading for the airfield, I said, slipping the phone back into my pocket. He really thinks he can still outrun the math. Let us go show him exactly why that is physically impossible. Before my father could take another step toward the corridor, his entire body locked up. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the boardroom confrontation and the dining room execution finally evaporated, leaving behind a fragile 64-year-old man who had survived a massive heart attack just 48 hours ago. He gasped a terrible hollow sound and his knees buckled. Dad, I screamed, lunging forward to catch him before he hit the concrete floor. Chief Henderson and the federal agents immediately dropped to assist. The color had completely vanished from my father's face, replaced by an ashen gray. His hand clawed at his chest right over his heart. Get a medic in here now, Chief Henderson bellowed into his radio. The chase for Preston instantly ceased to matter. I rode in the back of the armored ambulance, holding my father's cold hand as we raced back to the private cardiac facility. The flashing lights painted the interior of the vehicle in frantic shades of red and blue. The paramedics worked tirelessly to stabilize his vitals, but his heart rhythm remained dangerously erratic. He had pushed himself too far for my sake. Within an hour, we were back in the sterile white environment of the intensive care unit. Dad was unconscious, hooked up to a symphony of beeping monitors and intravenous lines. The lead cardiologist assured me he was stable, but the relapse was a stark reminder of his mortality. I sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside his bed, the encrypted USB drive resting on the small metal tray table next to my laptop. The federal agents had proceeded to the airfield without me promising to update me on Preston capture. I was completely alone in the quiet room, listening to the mechanical breathing of the ventilator. Then the heavy wooden door clicked open. It was not a nurse. Bianca slipped into the room, her breathing ragged and her eyes wide with panic. The pristine white Chanel suit she had worn to the boardroom was wrinkled and stained. Her perfect hair was in disarray. She looked exactly like what she was, a desperate fugitive stripped of her social armor. She did not look at our father lying in the hospital bed. She did not ask if he was going to survive. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning the surfaces, until they locked onto the small black table. The drive containing the articles of incorporation for the shell company bearing her signature. The drive that would send her to federal prison. Bianca lunged forward, her manicured hands reaching for the drive. I anticipated her movement. I stood up and intercepted her, grabbing her wrist with a grip fueled by years of suppressed anger. She gasped, struggling against my hold, but I twisted her arm downward, forcing her away from the table. Get your hands off me, Camille, Bianca hissed, thrashing wildly. Give me that drive, it is mine, you have no right to ruin my life. Your life? I asked, my voice a lethal whisper, keeping her pinned back. Our father is lying right there, fighting for his next breath, and you are worried about a flash drive. You did not even look at him, Bianca. You came here to steal evidence. Hi is dying anyway. Bianca spat, her mask completely shattering. Her words were laced with a venom I had never heard from her before. The golden child facade dissolved, revealing the rot underneath. Why should I go down for a dead man? Give me the drive, Camille. Preston abandoned me. He left me with nothing. If the feds get that data, I am going to prison. You deserve to go to prison, I replied, releasing her wrist and stepping in front of the table to block her path. You signed the papers, Bianca. You enjoyed the luxury cars, the galas, the country club memberships paid for by stolen pension funds. You sold your own family out for a lifestyle. You think you are so much better than me, Bianca sneered, tears of pure fury streaming down her face. You always walked around with your little spreadsheets looking down on me. You think it is easy being the face of this family. You think it is easy maintaining the standard mom and dad demanded. I had to be perfect, Camille. I had to join the right sorority, marry the right white man, and secure our place in Atlanta high society. You got to hide in your office. I had to perform every single day of my life. Nobody asked you to marry a criminal, I countered coldly. You chose the image over the substance. I chose survival, Bianca yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. You never understood what it took to keep Preston happy, to keep his investors happy. I knew he was cutting corners. I knew the money was dirty long before today. But I could not stop. I could not be the sister who failed. I could not let you win. I reached into my pocket and subtly tapped the screen of my phone, activating the voice recorder. Let her talk. Let her hang herself. So you helped him. I prompted, my tone shifting to calculated curiosity. You helped Preston lock Dad out of the company. Of course I helped him. Bianca confessed, her jealousy and desperation pouring out in a toxic wave. I gave Preston the private medical directive. I told him which doctor to bribe at Emory. I wanted Dad to be incapacitated. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is waiting for your inheritance? Dad was never going to give me real power. He was always going to look at me like a pretty doll. Preston promised me actual control. He promised me wealth that did not require daddy permission. You plotted to declare your own father legally dead while his heart was still beating, I said, summarizing her confession for the recording. Just so you could maintain your Instagram aesthetic and pay off your husband debts. Yes, Bianca screamed, her face twisted in an ugly snarl, and I would do it again. You are just a bitter, ugly accountant who could never get a man to look at you. You are destroying my life because you are jealous. Hand over the drive, Camille. It is my money. It is my company. I pulled my phone from my pocket, stopping the recording and saving the audio file directly to my secure cloud server. I held the screen up so she could see the bright red microphone icon disappearing. I am not jealous of you, Bianca, I said, my voice dropping to a freezing calm. I pity you. You sold your soul to a man who used you as a human shield, and you sold out the father who gave you everything. You are completely empty inside. Bianca stared at my phone, the realization of what she had just done crashing over her. She had just confessed to conspiracy, corporate fraud, and medical bribery on a recorded line. Her knees gave out and she collapsed onto the sterile hospital floor, sobbing into her hands. Please, Camille, she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. Please do not give that to the FBI. I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. I am your sister. You stopped being my sister the moment you left this man to die, I replied, pointing to our father unconscious form. The FBI already has the financial data, Bianca, and now they will have your full confession. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was a text from the federal agent leading the task force. Preston bypassed the airfield. He is making a run for the private helicopter pad on the south side. He threatened to destroy the final collateral. We need you. I looked down at the sobbing woman on the floor. There was no family tie left to sever. It was already dead. I grabbed my laptop and the USB drive, stepping right over Bianca as I headed for the door. I had a fugitive to catch and an empire to secure. I stepped out of the intensive care unit and let the heavy wooden door click shut behind me. I pulled my phone from my pocket and forwarded the audio file directly to the Federal Task Force secure server. Agent Marcus Miller from the Financial Crimes Division called me seconds later. He confirmed the audio was crystal clear. Bianca had just handed them the final piece of the puzzle. She had explicitly admitted to medical bribery and corporate espionage on a recorded line. I told Miller to send a unit to the hospital to arrest her quietly. I did not want my father waking up to a media circus outside his room. I also instructed the hospital head of security to place my father Floor on absolute lockdown. Nobody was getting near him. I rushed through the hospital lobby and out into the sweltering Atlanta evening. A matte black federal SUV was idling at the curb. Agent Miller opened the rear door for me. I climbed inside, opening my laptop before the vehicle even merged onto the highway. The sirens wailed, clearing a path through the dense city traffic. "Where is he exactly?" I asked, connecting my encrypted interface to the federal tracking system. Miller pointed to a glowing red dot on his dashboard monitor. He abandoned his luxury sedan on the shoulder of Interstate 85. He knows we flagged his license plates. He is moving on foot through the industrial district toward a private airstrip on the south side. He chartered a flight to the Bahamas under a fake name, but the pilot is refusing to take off until the wire transfer clears. Preston is trying to buy his way out, I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. He thinks he still has a secret stash. I logged into the global banking gateway using my Vanguard senior partner credentials. Preston was a creature of habit. He always kept a rainy day fund hidden in a Swiss banking vault. It was a classic wealth manager maneuver designed to survive a domestic asset freeze. But I was not just a domestic auditor. I was an apex predator in the financial ecosystem. I located the pending transaction. Preston was attempting to wire $200,000 to the charter pilot holding company. The routing sequence was bouncing through 3 different European servers to mask its origin. I intercepted the data packet in mid-transit. I did not just cancel the transaction. I triggered a permanent freeze on the host account, citing international money laundering protocols. I watched the screen as the status indicator shifted from pending to rejected. Preston was now standing on a dark runway with absolutely zero capital to his name. He could not buy a flight, he could not buy a car, he could not even buy a bottle of water. I had financially suffocated him. The radio in the front of the SUV crackled to life. A tactical unit stationed near Preston Buckhead Mansion was reporting in. "Agent Miller," the radio voice said. "You need to hear this. 2 unmarked vans just breached the gates of the Hayes residence. 10 heavily armed individuals entered the property. They bypassed the local security completely. They are tearing the house apart looking for him." "The Miami Syndicate," I stated, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the heat of the vehicle. They did not wait for the Friday deadline. Once I invalidated the Vance Logistics bearer shares and exposed Richard Sterling as their puppet, the syndicate realized Preston had failed them. They knew the $20 million was gone. Now they were coming to collect his life. Miller gripped the radio. "Hold your perimeter. Do not engage the syndicate members. Our priority is securing Preston Hayes alive. If the Russians get to him first, we lose our star witness for the federal indictment." The SUV accelerated, pushing 80 miles per hour down the empty express lane. I kept my eyes on the digital map, tracking the proximity between Preston location and the syndicate hit squad. The Russians were moving fast, figuring out that his house was empty. They would triangulate his position soon. Suddenly, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the laptop keyboard. The caller ID displayed an unknown international number. It was a burner phone. "It is him," I told Miller. "Preston is calling me." "Put it on speaker," Miller instructed, signaling the technical agent in the front seat to trace the cellular signal. "Keep him talking, Camille. We are 10 minutes away from the airfield." I pressed the green button and answered. "Hello, Preston." His breathing was ragged, loud, and panicked. The smooth, arrogant country club voice was completely gone, replaced by the frantic gasping of a hunted animal. "Camille," he wheezed, the wind rushing in the background. "You rejected the wire. The pilot locked me out. You locked my Swiss accounts." "I told you earlier today," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. "I am a forensic accountant. I hunt dirty money for a living. You have exactly $0 left in the global banking system. The feds are closing in from the north, and the Russian syndicate is currently tearing apart your mansion looking for your head. It is over. Surrender to the authorities, Preston. They are the only ones who will not put a bullet in you on sight." "You think you are so smart," Camille, Preston screamed, a hysterical edge to his voice. "You think you stripped me of all my leverage. I still have one card left to play, and it is going to destroy you." "You have nothing," I stated coldly. "Your company is seized. Your wife is facing federal charges. Your father-in-law survived your murder attempt. I have the deed to Oakwood Memorial, Preston spat out. The air in the SUV vanished. My blood turned to ice. Oakwood Memorial was the private historic cemetery where my mother was buried. She had passed away when I was a teenager. It was a sacred place for my father and me. What are you talking about? I demanded, my composure slipping for the first time. I bought the controlling stake in the land development company that manages Oakwood 3 years ago. Preston laughed, a cruel, desperate sound. I own the dirt your mother sleeps in, Camille, and right now I am holding a signed demolition order. If you do not unlock my Swiss account and clear that charter payment, right this second, I will sell that land to a commercial paving company tomorrow morning. They will bulldoze her grave and turn that entire cemetery into a shopping mall parking lot. I was grasping at straws, weaponizing the dead, because he could not defeat the living. He was trying to use the deepest emotional wound in my family history to extort his escape. Unlock the money! Camille Preston yelled over the roar of a distant engine. You have 5 minutes or I make the call and erase your mother from this earth completely. The line went dead. The silence in the federal vehicle was deafening. I stared at the black screen of my phone, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. Preston had crossed a line I never thought he would touch. He was threatening the resting place of my mother. He thought weaponizing my grief would force me to unlock his escape funds. He thought I would panic. Instead, my mind went to work. I looked up at Agent Miller. He wants his Swiss accounts unlocked. He claims he bought the controlling stake in Oakwood Memorial 3 years ago and will bulldoze it if I do not comply. Miller frowned, gripping the steering wheel as the driver navigated a sharp turn onto the highway. Is he telling the truth? I opened a new search terminal on my laptop. I pulled public property records for the cemetery. A holding company had indeed purchased the management rights 36 months ago. But I did not have time to trace the corporate veil right now. A far more immediate threat was escalating. The radio on the dashboard crackled with frantic static. Agent Miller, this is the surveillance team at the Buckhead estate. The syndicate operatives realize the house is empty. They just intercepted a digital ping from Bianca phone. They know she is at the cardiac facility. 2 tactical vans just broke off from the main group and are heading straight for the hospital. My heart hammered against my ribs. My father was lying in that intensive care unit, completely incapacitated. Bianca was on the floor outside his room. The Russian syndicate did not care who they had to eliminate to send a message. If they could not find Preston, they would take his wife and his father-in-law as collateral. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed Jackson, the head of my father's private security detail stationed at the hospital. He answered on the first ring. Jackson, I said, my voice tight but steady. 2 hostile vehicles are approaching your location, heavily armed syndicate mercenaries. They are coming for Bianca, and they will not hesitate to go through my father to get to her. Understood, Ms. Vance, Jackson replied, his tone shifting instantly into combat mode. I am initiating a hard lockdown of the entire building. We have the elevators disabled and the stairwells barricaded. I am pulling my men into a defensive perimeter around the intensive care unit. Nobody breaches this floor. Keep them safe, Jackson, I ordered. The authorities are on their way. I disconnected the call and looked at Miller. You need to send tactical units to that hospital right now. Miller was already speaking into his radio, dispatching armored response vehicles to the medical center. The tension inside our vehicle was suffocating. We were racing toward the airfield to catch Preston while my family was about to be besieged by international criminals. At the cardiac facility, the chaos erupted precisely 5 minutes later. I listened through an open radio channel Miller had patched into the vehicle communication system. Jackson reported that the mercenaries had breached the ground floor lobby. The hospital alarms blared in the background, a shrill mechanical warning. The mercenaries moved with military precision, bypassing the front desk and sweeping the lower floors to locate the VIP suites. Up on the cardiac floor, Bianca was trapped. According to Jackson, she was hyperventilating in the hallway, realizing that the men hunting her husband were now hunting her. She screamed for Preston to save her, screaming into a phone that went straight to voicemail. Preston had completely abandoned her, leaving her as bait to buy himself a few extra minutes of freedom. The security doors to the intensive care unit slammed shut, locking with heavy magnetic seals. Jackson and his highly trained operatives drew their weapons, taking up strategic positions behind reinforced pillars. They could hear the heavy boots of the syndicate mercenaries echoing up the emergency stairwell. The mercenaries began using breaching tools on the reinforced steel doors. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the radio feed. It was a terrifying testament to their determination. "Hold the line," Jackson yelled over the radio. "Federal units are 2 minutes out." While my father's security team fought to keep the syndicate at bay, our federal vehicles smashed through the chain-link gates of the private airfield. The tires squealed as the driver slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt on the dark tarmac. The airstrip was illuminated by sparse yellow floodlights. About 100 yards away sat a sleek twin-engine private jet. Preston had changed his flight plan. The Bahamas were no longer far enough. He was trying to fly directly to Geneva, Switzerland, hoping he could physically access his banking vaults to bypass the digital freeze I had initiated. The boarding stairs were lowered. Standing at the base of the stairs was Preston. He looked absolutely pathetic. The polished wealth manager persona had completely evaporated. He was waving his arms frantically at a man standing inside the cabin doorway. Even from a distance, I could see the sheer panic radiating from his body. We threw open the doors of the SUV. Agent Miller drew his weapon and began sprinting across the asphalt, followed by 3 other federal agents. I stepped out of the vehicle, the humid night air hitting my face. I watched the scene unfold with absolute clarity. Preston was begging the pilot. I could hear his shrill voice carrying across the empty runway. "I will give you $1 million once we land in Geneva." Preston screamed, holding up his wrists to show off a platinum watch and diamond cufflinks. "Take these now as a deposit. Just start the engines. You have to get me out of here." The pilot, a seasoned professional who clearly wanted no part of federal fraud or syndicate violence, shook his head. He kicked the boarding stairs away from the fuselage and hit the button to retract the cabin door. The heavy metal sealed shut, locking Preston outside in the humid Atlanta night. Preston stumbled backward, clutching his watch. He turned around and finally saw us. He saw the federal agents fanning out across the tarmac. He saw the flashing red and blue lights of the backup cruisers tearing onto the runway behind us. And he saw me walking steadily toward him, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder. I was trapped. His offshore money was frozen. His wife was left to face a hit squad. His corporate coup had failed. His escape route had literally closed its doors on him. There were no more loopholes to exploit, and no more family members to manipulate. Agent Miller raised his weapon, aiming directly at Preston's chest. "Get on the ground right now!" Miller shouted, his voice echoing across the empty tarmac. "Show me your hands, Hayes." Preston ignored the command. His eyes were wide with a manic desperation as his thumbs flew across the screen of his burner phone. He was sweating profusely, his custom suit clinging to his shaking frame. He was not looking at the guns pointed at him. He was looking at his banking applications. Come on," Preston muttered frantically, switching from one app to another. I stepped past the federal agents, my laptop bag resting heavy against my hip. I watched him try to access the secondary Cayman Island trust. Denied. He switched to the Swiss-numbered account he thought nobody knew about. 0 balance. He opened his decentralized cryptocurrency wallet. Access revoked. Preston dropped his phone and reached into his jacket pocket. The federal agents instantly tightened their grips on their weapons, shouting for him to freeze. But Preston did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a stack of elite black credit cards, waving them desperately in the air. "Listen to me!" Preston yelled at Agent Miller, his voice cracking. "I have a platinum line of credit. I can authorize a transfer of $5 million right now to any account you want. Just let me walk away. You do not need to do this. Take the money and look the other way." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that cut through the humid night air. "You cannot even buy a cup of coffee right now, Preston," I said, stepping into his line of sight. Preston stared at me, his chest heaving. "What did you do, Camille?" "I had backup protocols. I had contingency funds layered through international proxies. They were completely insulated from domestic injunctions. They were insulated from domestic law enforcement," I corrected him, stopping a few feet away. "But they were not insulated from the global banking compliance network. You forgot who you are dealing with. I am not just a local auditor. I am a senior partner at Vanguard Forensic Accounting." We handle risk assessment for the top 50 global financial institutions. I opened my laptop, balancing it on one arm to show him the glowing screen. The dashboard displayed his entire financial existence, rendered in bright red warning flags. When you tried to route that charter payment to the pilot, I triggered a Level 5 global asset freeze under the International Anti-Money Laundering Treaty. I explained, my voice steady and precise. I used my partner credentials to designate your social security number, your passport, and every corporate entity associated with your biometric data as an active terror financing threat. Preston's eyes bulged. You flagged me as a terrorist financier. You are laundering $20 million for a violent Russian syndicate, I replied coolly. The designation fits perfectly. Every bank in the world uses the Vanguard Compliance Registry. The moment I hit enter, an automated kill switch was sent to every financial institution on the planet. Your black cards are plastic garbage. Your offshore accounts are frozen pending a United Nations tribunal review. Your crypto wallets are blacklisted by every major exchange. You do not exist in the financial world anymore, Preston. You are a ghost. Preston dropped the credit cards. They clattered onto the tarmac, scattering around his expensive leather shoes. He fell to his knees, his hands gripping his hair, as the reality of his total destruction finally crushed him. He had spent his entire life worshipping money, using it as a weapon to manipulate, intimidate, and control everyone around him. Now he had absolutely nothing. Agent Miller stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Preston Hayes, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. As Miller locked the cuffs around Preston's wrists, the radio on the agent's shoulder crackled to life. It was the Tactical Command Center coordinating the hospital defense. Agent Miller, we have secure status at the cardiac facility, the voice announced over the radio. Federal SWAT units intercepted the syndicate mercenaries in the second-floor stairwell. We have 6 hostiles in custody. No casualties on our side. The target, known as Bianca Hayes, is secured and unharmed, though she is currently in a state of severe shock. Marcus Vance is stable and under heavy guard. I closed my eyes for a brief second, letting out a slow breath. My father was safe. My sister, despite her horrific betrayal, was alive to face justice. The Russian syndicate hit squad had failed. Preston heard the radio transmission. He looked up from the tarmac, his face twisted in a bizarre mixture of relief and absolute despair. His wife survived. His father-in-law survived. The syndicate mercenaries were captured, which meant they would inevitably trace the failed hit back to the Russian leadership in Miami. Preston owed them $20 million, and he had just gotten a heavily armed hit squad arrested on federal charges. The syndicate was never going to stop hunting him now. Prison was the only place he might survive the week. Get him up, Miller ordered the other agents. Put him in the back of the transport vehicle. The agents hauled Preston to his feet, dragging him toward the armored SUV. But as they pushed him toward the open door, Preston dug his heels into the asphalt. He thrashed against the agents, turning his head to glare at me with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. You think this is over, Camille? Preston screamed, his voice echoing across the silent airfield. You think you beat me just because you took my money. I still have the deed. I still own Oakwood Memorial. I stopped walking, my hand tightening around the strap of my laptop bag. You hear me? Preston yelled, struggling against the agents holding him down. I bought the management company 3 years ago. I hold the commercial rights to the dirt your mother is buried in. You might send me to prison, but my lawyers will execute that demolition order tomorrow morning. I will have the construction crews tear up every single grave. I will pave over her headstone. Get him in the car, Miller shouted, shoving Preston into the back seat. I will erase her, Camille, Preston shrieked as the heavy reinforced door slammed shut, cutting off his manic threats. I stood on the tarmac, watching the flashing lights of the federal vehicle illuminate the dark runway. The humid air felt suddenly heavy, pressing down on my shoulders. Preston was handcuffed and financially ruined, but his final threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. He was a desperate, malicious man who knew exactly how to strike at the deepest vulnerabilities of my family. Oakwood Memorial was a historic cemetery resting on prime real estate. Developers had been trying to buy it for decades to build luxury condominiums. My father had fought them off for years to protect my mother's resting place. If Preston had somehow managed to secretly acquire the controlling stake in the management company, he could legally authorize the relocation of the graves and sell the land. Agent Miller walked over to me, his expression grim. "You did incredible work tonight, Camille. We have enough evidence to put him away for a very long time. But that threat he just made about the cemetery, is he bluffing?" I looked at the armored SUV holding the man who had tried to destroy my entire family. "Preston does not bluff when it comes to inflicting pain," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing calm. "He thinks he is holding a thermal detonator over my mother grave. He thinks he can use that land to negotiate a reduced sentence or force us into a settlement." I opened my laptop again, the screen casting a pale blue glow across my face. "What are you doing?" Miller asked. "I am finishing this," I replied, my fingers resting on the keys. "Preston thinks he owns the dirt my mother sleeps in. I am going to show him exactly who owns the ground he stands on." I placed my laptop on the hood of the federal vehicle. The humid air of the airfield clung to my skin, but I felt entirely cold, entirely focused. Agent Miller stood beside me, watching the lines of code and property registries reflect in my glasses. Inside the armored transport vehicle, 30 yards away, Preston was banging his handcuffed fists against the reinforced glass. He was screaming something, but the soundproof doors muffled his threats. Then Agent Miller's secure cellular phone began to ring. The caller identification displayed the internal communication line from the transport vehicle. "He is demanding to speak with you," Miller said, answering the call and putting it on speakerphone. "He says it is a formal negotiation." I leaned toward the device. "You have no negotiating power, Preston. You are sitting in the back of a federal transport vehicle facing decades in prison. I have the demolition permits." Camille Preston hissed, his voice echoing through the speaker with a venomous clarity. "I filed them 3 days ago under a commercial redevelopment clause. The bulldozers are already parked at the staging lot 2 miles from Oakwood Memorial. They have automated instructions to begin clearing the eastern quadrant at exactly 6 in the morning. Your mother grave is right in the center of that quadrant." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice perfectly flat. "You are lying. You cannot bulldoze a historic cemetery without a public hearing and municipal approval." Preston let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "You think I play by normal rules, Camille. I used the stolen pension funds to bribe the zoning commissioner last year. We reclassified the eastern quadrant as structurally unsafe due to soil erosion. The public hearing was waived under an Emergency Commercial Stabilization Act. It is perfectly legal, and it is happening in exactly 6 hours. Unless you make a deal with me right now." "What kind of deal?" Miller demanded, leaning into the speaker. "You are looking at federal wire fraud. A local zoning permit does not give you federal immunity." "I do not need federal immunity from you," Preston sneered. "I need capital to pay off the Miami syndicate so they do not butcher my wife and your father. I need you to lift the international terror financing flag you put on my biometric data, Camille. You unlock my Swiss accounts, and you authorize the charter pilot to take me to Geneva. If my plane leaves United States airspace by dawn, I will make the call to halt the demolition. If you keep me caged, those bulldozers will tear your mother resting place to pieces. You will have to sift through the rubble to find her bones." The sheer cruelty of his words hung in the humid air. He was a monster, cornered and lashing out with the most vicious weapon he could find. He knew how much my mother meant to me. He knew my father visited her grave every single Sunday. Destroying Oakwood Memorial would break my father completely, especially after surviving a massive heart attack just 2 days ago. "You are bluffing," I said, my fingers flying across my laptop keyboard. "I am pulling the municipal zoning records right now." "Go ahead and look," Preston taunted. "Look for a company called Horizon Development Partners. That is my entity. I bought the controlling stake in Oakwood Memorial 3 years ago when the original caretaker went bankrupt. I have been sitting on this property waiting for the right time to liquidate it. Consider this an expedited liquidation. I accessed the Atlanta Municipal Database, navigating through the complex web of property registries and commercial zoning permits. My eyes scanned the digital documents rapidly. The blood drained from my face. He was not bluffing. The demolition permits were real. They were signed, stamped, and fully authorized by the city zoning commissioner. The eastern quadrant of Oakwood Memorial was slated for emergency commercial leveling at 6 in the morning. Horizon Development Partners was listed as the primary contractor. The legal paperwork was ironclad. Preston had meticulously planned this contingency to ensure he had the ultimate leverage over my family. Agent Miller saw the expression on my face. He looked at the screen and cursed under his breath. "He actually got the permits," Miller said quietly. "The zoning commissioner bypassed the public notice protocols. The bulldozers really are authorized to roll at dawn." "Do you see it now?" Camille Preston asked, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. "Do you see how thoroughly I own you? You thought you could trap me with a simple banking freeze. You thought you were the smartest person in the room because you can read a spreadsheet. But I operate in the real world. I own the physical ground your family is buried in. You have 5 hours to make your choice. Unlock my money, or watch your mother get paved over." I stared at the glowing screen, my mind racing through thousands of financial variables, corporate laws, and forensic accounting strategies. Preston had backed me into a terrifying corner. If I unlocked his Swiss accounts, I would be an accessory to international money laundering, and the Miami syndicate would still have the power to hunt my family. If I kept the funds frozen, he would execute the demolition order from his jail cell and destroy the most sacred piece of my family history. I was using the dead to extort the living. It was a flawless, ruthless strategy. "Are you going to let him do this?" Miller asked, his voice tight with frustration. "We cannot negotiate with a federal fugitive, Camille. If you release those funds, you compromise the entire investigation. We lose our leverage over the syndicate." "I know," I said, closing my eyes for a brief second. "I know exactly what is at stake." "So what is your answer?" Camille Preston demanded through the speakerphone. "Do we have a deal, or do I make the call to the construction crew right now?" I opened my eyes. The panic that had gripped my chest a moment ago vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. Preston had made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed that because he bought the cemetery 3 years ago, he still owned it today. He assumed that his corporate veil was impenetrable. He forgot that he was dealing with an apex predator of the financial ecosystem. "Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register, "you have always underestimated me. You thought I was just a boring bookkeeper. You thought you could blindside me with a zoning permit. But you left a paper trail. You always leave a paper trail." "What are you talking about?" Preston scoffed. "The deed is perfectly legal." "I am talking about the leverage you used to buy that deed," I replied, my fingers dancing across the keyboard once more. "You did not buy Oakwood Memorial with cash, Preston. You bought it using a highly leveraged commercial loan from a secondary lender. You used the cemetery itself as collateral for the mortgage." Preston went dead silent on the other end of the line. "I am going to the federal holding facility, Miller," I said, slamming my laptop shut and grabbing my bag. "Put him in a secure interrogation room. I want to look him in the eyes when I dismantle his final illusion." "You cannot stop the bulldozers," Preston yelled, panic suddenly bleeding back into his voice. "The permits are filed. The crew is contracted. We will see about that," I said. I reached over and ended the call, cutting off his frantic screaming. I turned to the federal agent. "Get me a helicopter to that holding facility right now. I have a demolition order to cancel and a corporate execution to finalize." Miller did not hesitate. He spoke rapidly into his radio, commanding an immediate air transport from the regional federal headquarters. We exited the armored vehicle, stepping back onto the humid tarmac. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminated the night, casting long shadows across the concrete. We moved toward the designated landing zone, a safe distance from the chaos of Preston arrest. Within 10 minutes, the rhythmic thud of a helicopter rotor blade cut through the heavy Atlanta air. The sleek black chopper with federal insignia touched down, sending ripples of heat and wind across the runway. Miller and I ducked under the spinning blades and climbed aboard. As soon as our seatbelts clicked, the pilot lifted off, banking sharply toward the downtown skyline. The flight to the federal holding facility took less than 12 minutes, but every second felt like an eternity. Below us, the city lights sprawled like a glittering web, unaware of the high-stakes war being waged in its shadows. I stared out the window, my mind rehearsing the final moves of this complex chess match. Preston thought he had outsmarted me with a bureaucratic loophole. He thought his cruelty could break my resolve. I was about to learn a very painful lesson about the nature of true power. The helicopter landed on the reinforced roof of the federal building. We descended rapidly through the secure elevators, bypassing normal processing protocols. Miller led me down a stark white corridor lined with reinforced steel doors. We stopped in front of interrogation room 4. "He is in there," Miller said, gesturing to the heavy door. "He has been screaming for a phone call since he arrived. He thinks his demolition order is still active." "Open it," I instructed, my voice devoid of any emotion. Miller swiped his keycard, and the heavy lock disengaged with a metallic clack. I pushed the door open and stepped into the small, brightly lit room. Preston sat at the metal table, his wrists cuffed to a heavy steel ring bolted to the center. The custom Italian suit he had worn with such arrogance hours ago was now rumpled and stained with sweat. His hair was disheveled, his eyes darting frantically toward the door as I entered. When he saw me, a twisted, triumphant smirk spread across his face. "You came," Preston sneered, leaning forward as far as the chains would allow. "I knew you would. You finally realized I am not bluffing. My lawyers have the demolition permits, Camille. They execute the order at dawn. Now unlock my accounts." I did not sit down. I stood across the table from him, towering over his seated form. I slowly unzipped my bag and pulled out a thick manila folder, placing it deliberately on the metal surface. "You file a lot of paperwork, Preston." I began, my tone conversational. "You file articles of incorporation. You file fraudulent tax returns. You even filed an emergency demolition permit for a historic cemetery. But you know what you did not file." Preston's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "What are you talking about?" "You did not file your quarterly mortgage payments for Horizon Development Partners," I stated, tapping the folder. "You were so busy funneling stolen pension funds into your offshore accounts and bribing zoning commissioners that you neglected the basic operational expenses of your own shell companies. You defaulted on the commercial loan you used to purchase the management rights for Oakwood Memorial." "That is a lie," Preston barked, his voice pitching higher. "I authorized an automatic draft. The payments are current." I opened the folder, sliding a bank statement across the table. "Read it, Preston." He strained against his cuffs, squinting at the document. The color drained from his face as he processed the numbers. The automatic drafts had failed 3 months ago. The secondary lender, a predatory firm known for aggressive collections, had initiated foreclosure proceedings. The bank seized the collateral. Preston, I explained, watching his eyes dart wildly across the page. "They foreclosed on Horizon Development Partners 90 days ago. The management rights, the property deeds, everything related to Oakwood Memorial reverted to the lender. Your demolition permits are completely invalid because you no longer own the company that requested them." Preston's chest heaved, his breathing shallow and rapid. "No, no, no," he muttered, shaking his head. "That cannot be right. Even if they foreclose, the property goes to public auction. I would have received a notice. I could have bought it back." I slid another document across the table. This one bore the seal of a specialized debt acquisition firm. "It did not go to public auction," I said, leaning closer, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "The lender sold the distressed debt in a private closed-market transaction. They sold the entire portfolio of Horizon Development Partners for pennies on the dollar to a buyer who paid entirely in cash." Preston stared at the final signature on the acquisition document. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he read the name of the new controlling shareholder. It was my name. Camille Vance. "I bought your debt, Preston," I said, straightening up. "I bought your company. I bought the demolition permits you thought you could use to destroy my mother resting place. I own Horizon Development Partners now, which means I own Oakwood Memorial. And more importantly, I own you. You are currently my largest debtor." Preston slumped back in the metal chair, the fight completely draining out of him. The realization of his total comprehensive defeat finally registered. He had played every dirty trick in his arsenal, and I had systematically dismantled every single one. He was penniless, facing federal prison, and now he owed millions to the very woman he had tried to destroy. "You are a monster," Preston whispered, his voice hollow. "No, Preston," I replied, gathering the documents and placing them back in my bag. "I am a forensic accountant, and your ledger is finally balanced." I turned and walked out of the interrogation room, leaving him alone with his failure. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind me, sealing his fate. Agent Miller stood in the hallway holding a cup of coffee. He handed it to me, his expression full of professional respect. "Is it done?" Miller asked. "It is done," I said, taking a sip of the bitter black coffee. "The demolition is cancelled, the company is secure, and Preston Hayes is officially bankrupt." As we walked toward the elevator, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Bianca. She had been processed and was currently sitting in a holding cell awaiting her arraignment. "Camille, please," she wrote. "I need help. You cannot leave me here. I am your sister." I read the message, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The anger and betrayal that had fueled me through the night had burned away, leaving only cold clarity. I typed my response carefully. "You made your choices, Bianca. Now you face the consequences. Do not contact me again." I blocked her number and slipped the phone into my pocket. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across the city. The storm was finally over. The Vance legacy was secure, and I had a new empire to build. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when my phone chimed with a priority alert from the Vanguard Secure server. The digital freeze had successfully paralyzed Preston and his offshore accounts, but seizing digital assets was only half the battle. A man like Preston always kept physical leverage. He kept analog ledgers, burner drives, and hard copy blackmail material locked away in the real world. If the Miami syndicate managed to send a cleaner crew to his corporate headquarters before the authorities did, that physical evidence would vanish into thin air. Agent Miller walked back over to me, holding a fresh stack of federal warrants. "A judge just signed off on the search and seizure orders for Apex Holdings," Miller stated, his voice sharp and businesslike. "We are moving on his primary office building in Midtown right now. I need you on site, Camille. My cyber team is good, but we need your forensic expertise to identify which servers and lockboxes hold the syndicate routing data." I nodded, tossing my empty coffee cup into a nearby bin. "Let us go dismantle the rest of his life." We rode in a convoy of unmarked black SUVs, weaving through the early morning Atlanta traffic. The city was just waking up, but our tactical unit was operating with lethal urgency. Preston corporate headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of the sleek glass skyscraper in the financial district. It was a fortress of mirrored glass and polished steel designed to project absolute legitimacy. Today it was going to become a federal crime scene. The convoy screeched to a halt in the circular driveway of the skyscraper. Dozens of FBI agents wearing tactical vests spilled out of the vehicles. I walked flanked by Miller and 2 heavily armed agents stepping through the revolving glass doors with undeniable authority. The morning security guards in the lobby froze their hands, hovering over their radios, as the federal agents flashed their badges and locked down the building entrances. "Nobody goes in and nobody comes out," Miller commanded. We bypassed the lobby, completely commandeering the express elevator to the executive suites on the 40th floor. The tension in the enclosed space was palpable. These agents knew they were walking into the nerve center of a massive money laundering operation connected to a violent international syndicate. They had their hands resting on their holstered weapons. I just had my laptop bag, but I felt equally armed. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. The reception area of Apex Holdings was a monument to Preston greed, featuring imported Italian marble floors and panoramic views of the city. A handful of early arriving executives and administrative assistants were already at their desks. When they saw the tactical vests and federal windbreakers, a wave of absolute panic swept through the room. "FBI search warrant," Miller shouted, his voice booming across the open floor plan. "Step away from your keyboards. Take your hands off your mice and step away from your desks immediately. Do not touch your phones." Most of the employees complied, instantly raising their hands and backing away from their workstations in pure terror. But at the far end of the executive corridor, behind a frosted glass door, I saw a shadow moving frantically. It was Preston Chief Compliance Officer, a man named David, who had gladly signed off on the fraudulent Vance Logistics vendor contracts. "Hi is destroying evidence," I yelled, pointing toward the frosted glass room at the end of the hall. 2 agents sprinted down the corridor, kicking the heavy door open. I followed closely behind Miller. Inside the office, David was frantically feeding stacks of paper into a heavy-duty industrial shredder while simultaneously smashing a hammer against a stack of external hard drives. "Pin him against the wall," Miller ordered. The agents tackled David, sending him crashing into the mahogany bookshelf. I immediately rushed to the shredder, hitting the emergency kill switch. I pulled out the remaining documents clutched in David's hand. They were the original promissory notes for the toxic loans Preston had issued to my aunt and uncle. David was trying to destroy the physical proof of the extortion ring. I carefully placed the half-shredded documents into a clear plastic evidence bag provided by one of the agents. "The hard drives are smashed," David sneered, his face pressed against the drywall. "You are too late. You get nothing." I looked at the shattered plastic and warped metal of the drives on the floor. I let out a dry laugh. "You think a forensic accountant relies on external hard drives, David? Those are decoys. Preston's ego is too massive to trust his real leverage to a portable device you could carry out in your pocket. He keeps the real ledger locked in a physical safe." I turned to Miller. "Check the architectural blueprints we pulled from the municipal database. Preston had a private suite renovated 2 years ago. He claimed it was a private bathroom, but the square footage did not match the plumbing requisitions." Miller signaled his team, and we marched down the hall to Preston's personal executive office. It was a massive room reeking of expensive cologne and imported leather. I walked straight past his oversized desk and headed for the private washroom. I ran my hands along the custom oak paneling lining the wall next to the mirror. Preston was predictable. He loved cliches. He loved feeling like a mastermind from a cinematic thriller. I pressed firmly against the wood paneling, searching for the biometric seam. My fingers caught a slight indentation. "Hand me a pry bar," I told the tactical agent standing behind me. The agent handed me a heavy steel tool. I wedged it into the seam and pulled with all my strength. The oak panel cracked and splintered, falling away to reveal a solid steel biometric wall safe embedded directly into the structural concrete. "Hi is the only one who has the fingerprint access," David yelled from the hallway where he was currently in handcuffs. "You cannot open it." "I do not need his fingerprint," I replied, pulling my laptop from my bag and connecting a specialized decryption cable to the digital keypad of the safe. Preston used the same algorithmic sequence for his physical security that he used for his offshore routing numbers. He was arrogant enough to believe his foundational code was unbreakable. I ran the decryption sequence I had built during the night. The laptop screen flooded with rolling data intercepting the safe internal locking mechanism. It took exactly 42 seconds. The heavy steel door clicked and swung open. Inside the safe sat the holy grail of financial prosecution. Neatly organized rows of physical ledgers containing the raw, unencrypted transaction histories of the Miami syndicate. There were flash drives holding the original unedited pension fund audits and a thick black binder containing the blackmail material Preston held over half the politicians in Atlanta. Agent Miller peered into the safe, letting out a low whistle of disbelief. "We have him, Camille. This is not just wire fraud anymore. This is a federal racketeering case. We have the entire syndicate network mapped out in physical ink." I carefully stepped back, letting the federal evidence collection team move in to photograph and bag the contents of the safe. My part in the physical raid was over. I had provided the federal government with a titanium-locked prosecution case. Preston Hayes would never see the outside of a federal penitentiary for the rest of his natural life. The audit was complete. The evidence was secured. The corporate raid was a total, uncompromising victory. I stood in the stark hallway of the federal holding facility, my phone buzzing relentlessly in my pocket. The notifications were a steady stream of collapsing alliances and severed ties. The news of Preston's arrest had broken across the Atlanta morning broadcasts like a thunderclap. The real casualty, however, was not Preston. He was already a ghost in the financial system. The real casualty was Bianca. Her public relations strategy had relied entirely on maintaining the illusion of the wealthy, victimized heiress. But the federal raid on Apex Holdings and the subsequent unsealing of the shell company documents bearing her signature had obliterated that illusion. The very society she had cultivated so meticulously was now actively tearing her apart. Agent Miller stepped out of an adjacent room, handing me a printed transcript. "The arraignment is set for this afternoon, Camille. Her lawyer tried to arrange a private transport to the courthouse, but the press has already surrounded the building. She is going to have to walk out the front door. I scanned the transcript. It was the formal indictment listing Bianca as a co-conspirator in wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The reality of her situation was finally solidifying. She has requested to see you. Miller added, his tone carefully neutral. She says she will not speak to her legal counsel until she talks to you. I folded the transcript, sliding it into my bag. I will give her exactly 2 minutes. Miller nodded, leading me down another sterile corridor toward a secure interview room. The heavy door swung open, revealing a scene that starkly contrasted with the pristine image my sister had projected her entire life. Bianca sat at the metal table wearing standard-issue detention clothing. The designer Chanel suit was gone, replaced by shapeless fabric. Her hair was pulled back haphazardly, and her face, devoid of makeup, was pale and drawn. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Camille," she gasped, half rising from the metal chair before the chain attached to her wrist pulled taut. "You came. I knew you would not leave me here." I remained standing near the door, crossing my arms. "I am here because the federal agents asked me to listen, Bianca. Not because I am staging a rescue. You have to tell them I did not know," she pleaded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You have the power to stop this, Camille. You froze his accounts. You can tell them he forged my signature on those shell company documents." I looked at her, feeling a profound sense of detachment. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was asking for an alibi. She wanted me to perjure myself to save her social standing. "I am a forensic accountant, Bianca," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I trace digital signatures for a living. You authorized those transfers from your own encrypted device. You logged into the portal using your biometric data. I am not going to lie to a federal judge to protect you." Her desperation morphed into anger, a rapid regression to her golden child entitlement. "You cannot do this to me, Camille. Do you know what they are saying about me outside? My sorority sisters have publicly disavowed me. The church elders voted to revoke our membership this morning. I am losing my home, my friends, my entire life." "You built a life on stolen money," I replied coldly. "You bought the loyalty of your friends with funds siphoned from the people who trusted our father. You traded your integrity for a country club membership, and now the bill is due." "I did it for the family," she yelled, straining against the chain. "I did it to keep us relevant. You never understood the pressure." "I understand exactly what you did," I said, stepping closer to the table. "You left Dad to die in a hospital bed because it was financially convenient. You tried to steal the company he built from scratch. You partnered with a man who threatened to bulldoze our mother grave. Do not dare invoke the word family to justify your greed." Bianca collapsed back into the chair, covering her face with her hands. Her sobs echoed loudly in the small, concrete room. "Please, Camille," she whispered, her voice broken. "I have nothing left. Preston abandoned me. My friends abandoned me. If you walk out that door, I am completely alone." I watched her cry, recognizing the finality of the moment. For 32 years, she had viewed me as an obstacle, an inconvenience, or an embarrassment. She only remembered we were sisters when she needed a shield to absorb the consequences of her actions. "You are alone because you chose to be," I said, my voice lacking any trace of sympathy or malice. It was simply the truth. You alienated everyone who actually cared about you in pursuit of people who only cared about your bank account. I turned toward the door, reaching for the handle. "Camille, wait!" Bianca cried out, lunging forward as far as the restraints allowed. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. Just please help me negotiate a plea deal. I cannot survive in a federal prison. I will do anything." I paused, looking back at her over my shoulder. "The federal prosecutors have the audio recording of you admitting to medical bribery, Bianca. They do not need a plea deal. They have a flawless conviction." I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, the heavy steel closing definitively behind me. Agent Miller was waiting, his expression reflecting a quiet understanding of the boundary I had just enforced. "Is she cooperating?" Miller asked. "She is looking for a scapegoat," I replied, adjusting the strap of my laptop bag. "But she is out of options. You can proceed with the arraignment." I walked out of the federal holding facility, stepping into the blinding morning sunlight. The media circus was already gathering near the courthouse entrance, reporters jockeying for position, satellite trucks humming with activity. They were waiting for the spectacular fall of Atlanta golden couple. I bypassed the chaotic crowd, entirely heading toward the private exit where my security contractor had parked the matte black SUV. The driver opened the rear door for me. I climbed inside the cool air conditioning, providing instant relief from the suffocating Georgia heat. As the vehicle pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the downtown traffic, I looked out the tinted window. The city skyline rose majestically against the clear blue sky. The Vance Logistics Tower stood prominent among the glass structures, a monument to my father's resilience and my own forensic precision. The toxic ties that had bound me for decades were finally severed. Bianca would face the federal justice system. Preston would answer to the syndicate and the courts. I leaned back against the leather seat, pulling my phone from my pocket. I had a logistics empire to secure and an entirely new legacy to build. The cleanup was finished. It was time to get to work. I arrived at the Vance Logistics headquarters before 8 o'clock that morning, stepping into the executive suite with a mandate to rebuild. But while I was stabilizing our legitimate corporate operations, the shockwaves of my forensic audit were violently dismantling the criminal underworld. Agent Miller and his federal task force did not waste a single hour. The encrypted drives I handed over during the raid contained more than just Preston local embezzlement schemes. They held the complete digital architecture of the Miami syndicate laundering apparatus. I had mapped their shell companies, their offshore proxy servers, and their corrupted commercial real estate holdings down to the last cent. By Wednesday, tactical federal units were executing simultaneous raids across South Florida and the eastern seaboard. They seized shipping yards, boutique investment firms, and luxury condominiums that served as syndicate safe houses. The Russian leadership had operated with impunity for a decade, assuming their digital camouflage was impenetrable. They never anticipated that a forensic accountant from Atlanta would unravel their entire global network in 48 hours just to protect her father. Preston sat in a maximum security holding cell, watching the news of the Miami raids play on a small, muted television. The realization of his absolute doom must have been suffocating. He had failed to deliver the $20 million. He had failed to execute the hostile takeover of Vance Logistics. And worst of all, his sloppy financial hygiene had handed the Federal Bureau of Investigation the exact roadmap needed to cripple his most dangerous creditors. The federal proceedings moved with unprecedented speed. Preston high-priced defense attorneys abandoned him the moment his offshore accounts were permanently frozen by the International Banking Compliance Network. He was assigned an overworked public defender who took exactly one look at the mountain of forensic evidence I had compiled and immediately advised his client to accept a plea deal. There was no defense against the math. The transaction logs, the biometric logins, the recorded phone calls, and the physical ledgers pulled from his hidden wall safe created an airtight prosecution. Richard Sterling did not fare much better. Once my data exposed Sterling Freight as a corporate front for the Russian syndicate, federal regulators swooped in. Sterling assets were frozen, his corporate charter revoked, and he was indicted for racketeering. The hostile takeover threat evaporated instantly, leaving Vance Logistics as the undisputed king of the regional supply chain. Before the sentencing hearing, Preston made several desperate attempts to reach out to me through his public defender. He offered to testify against other corrupt executives. He offered to reveal hidden safety deposit boxes. He even begged me to use my federal contacts to place him in a witness protection program in exchange for signing over the last remaining fragments of his personal estate. I rejected every single offer. I told his lawyer that Vanguard Forensic Accounting does not negotiate with criminals, and neither does the Vance family. He had made his bed with the syndicate, and now he had to sleep in it. 6 weeks later, I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse wearing a sharp-tailored navy suit. I watched Preston Hayes, the man who had mocked my profession and tried to destroy my family, stand before a federal judge. His custom-tailored Italian wardrobe had been replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He looked hollowed out, his arrogant posture completely broken. His hair was thinning, and his hands trembled visibly as he gripped the wooden defense table. The judge read the charges with clinical precision: wire fraud, corporate espionage, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit extortion. The gavel slammed down, echoing loudly in the cavernous room. The judge sentenced Preston to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. But 15 years behind bars was not his true punishment. The true punishment was the debt. The federal justice system could confiscate his physical assets and restrict his freedom, but they could not erase the $20 million he still owed the Russian syndicate. The syndicate had lost millions more in the federal seizures, and they placed the blame entirely squarely on Preston's shoulders. As the bailiffs moved to handcuff him, Preston turned and locked eyes with me across the crowded courtroom. His eyes were wide, filled with a raw, primal terror that stripped away any remaining facade of his country club bravado. He knew exactly what awaited him inside that prison. The syndicate had operatives embedded deep within the federal penal system. There would be no protective custody secure enough to hide him. Every time a cell door closed, every time a shadow fell across the prison yard, every time a new inmate walked into the cafeteria, Preston would be waiting for the collection agent. He would spend every day of the next 15 years looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows, living in a state of perpetual psychological torture. He was a dead man walking on borrowed time. I did not smile. I did not offer him a smug wave or a dramatic parting speech. I simply maintained his gaze with cold, absolute indifference until he was physically forced to look away by the bailiffs dragging him toward the holding area. How was a completed audit? A closed file, a discrepancy that had been identified, isolated, and permanently removed from the ledger. He no longer mattered to me. I left the courthouse and stepped into the bustling Atlanta afternoon. The air felt incredibly light. The Vance family name was completely cleared of any association with his crimes. Chief Henderson and Agent Miller had ensured the press briefings highlighted Vance Logistics as the primary victim of a rogue wealth manager. The federal agencies intentionally praised our internal auditing protocols for identifying and stopping the fraud before it could compromise the broader market. Our stock prices had not just stabilized, they had rebounded wildly, exceeding their previous valuation. Investors love stability, and nothing projects stability, quite like a company that can surgically amputate a corrupt executive and assist in a federal takedown without missing a single shipping delivery. The market rewards ruthless efficiency. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, placing my briefcase on the passenger side. My phone buzzed with a message from my father assistant confirming that his physical therapy session had gone perfectly and that he was waiting for me at the corporate headquarters. I started the engine, listening to the quiet hum of the motor. The criminal elements were eradicated. The traitors were exiled. The threats were neutralized. Now it was time to claim my rightful place at the head of the table. That thought echoed in my mind as I stepped out of the elevator and onto the executive floor. It had been exactly 6 months since the day Preston was hauled off to a federal holding facility, and our family was purged of its deepest rot. The changing of seasons brought a profound shift to the atmosphere inside the Vance Logistics skyscraper. The suffocating tension that used to choke these hallways was entirely gone. In its place was a sleek, humming efficiency driven by people who respected the work rather than the social hierarchy. I walked down the corridor, acknowledging the greetings of the vice presidents and division directors we had elevated to replace the corrupt board members. We did not just survive the corporate sabotage, we thrived. I had completely restructured the operational framework, implementing strict forensic auditing protocols across all departments. I retained my equity as a senior partner at Vanguard, but my daily focus was entirely devoted to the empire my father built. I had secured the supply lines, renegotiated our shipping contracts, and purged every vendor associated with Preston and his shadow network. The market responded to our transparency with overwhelming confidence. Our quarterly profits were breaking historical records. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the primary executive suite. My father was already there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. He looked magnificent. The frail, ashen man who had collapsed in the intensive care unit was a distant memory. 6 months of rigorous physical therapy, a strict medical regimen, and the removal of chronic psychological stress had restored his vitality. He stood tall, his shoulders broad, wearing a pristine, tailored suit that commanded respect. He did not need a cane. He did not look tired. He looked like the titan who had conquered the logistics industry 3 decades ago. He turned around as I closed the doors, hearing the click of the lock. He smiled, a genuine and warm expression that reached his eyes. "You are late, Camille," he said, his deep voice carrying a tone of affectionate teasing rather than criticism. "I was finalizing the acquisition of Sterling Freight," I replied, walking over to the heavy mahogany desk. "Their board agreed to our buyout terms this morning. We absorbed their primary shipping routes and liquidated their useless shell assets. We officially own the regional monopoly, Dad." My father let out a low, resonant laugh, shaking his head in sheer admiration. He walked over to his desk and took a seat, pointing to the leather chair opposite him. I sat down, placing my briefcase on the carpet. The silence that settled between us was not tense. It was comfortable, heavy with unsaid acknowledgments that we were finally ready to vocalize. "I asked you to meet me in here today because we need to finalize the transition," he began, his hands folded neatly on the polished wood. "But before we sign the paperwork, I need to say something to you. Something I should have said years ago." I remained quiet, giving him the space he needed. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me, his eyes shining with an unfamiliar vulnerability. "I was blind, Camille," he said, his voice steady but thick with regret. "I built this company believing that success required playing a very specific game. I thought we had to project a flawless image to the elite circles of this city to survive. When Bianca learned to play that game so perfectly, I rewarded her for it. I mistook her social manipulation for corporate strategy. And in doing so, I completely overlooked the brilliant, capable daughter sitting right in front of me." He reached across the desk, resting his large hand over mine. "I viewed your independence as a rejection of our family," he continued. "I thought your quiet dedication to your accounting career meant you did not care about the legacy I was building. I could not see that you were actually forging the exact skills necessary to save us all. You did not just rescue my company, Camille. You rescued my life. You protected your mother's resting place. You fought for this family when the people I favored left me to die. I am so profoundly sorry that it took a crisis of this magnitude for me to recognize your true worth. Please forgive me for being so foolish." I looked at the man who had loomed larger than life throughout my childhood. Hearing him admit his failures, hearing him validate my worth, without conditions, healed a wound I had carried for over 30 years. "I forgive you, Dad," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "We both learned hard lessons. But we are here now. We survived." He nodded, blinking back the moisture in his eyes. He pulled a thick leather-bound portfolio from the center drawer of his desk and slid it toward me. "I am stepping down, Camille," he announced formally. "I am retiring effectively immediately. The board has already been briefed and they are in unanimous agreement. These are the transfer documents. I am signing over 100% of my voting shares and the title of Chief Executive Officer to you. This is no longer my company, it is yours." I looked at the documents bearing the embossed golden seal of Vance Logistics. I did not hesitate. I picked up the solid brass pen and signed my name on the designated lines, executing the transfer of power with swift, precise strokes. There was no fanfare, no applause, just the quiet sealing of a promise between a father and a daughter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, disrupting the quiet moment. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a call from a federal correctional facility. Bianca was calling from the penitentiary, where she was currently serving her sentence for corporate fraud. She had tried calling every week, begging for commissary money, begging for a specialized lawyer, begging for a second chance. I stared at her name on the glowing screen. I felt no anger. I felt absolutely nothing. I pressed the red button, declining the call and permanently blocking the automated prison number. The toxic ties were officially severed. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, completely detached from her fate. My father stood up, walking around the desk. He gestured to the large leather executive chair he had occupied for 30 years. "It belongs to you now, Madam CEO," he said, stepping aside. I stood up, smoothing my tailored navy blazer, and walked around the desk. I turned and lowered myself into the high-backed leather chair. It fit perfectly. I swiveled slightly, looking out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The sun was shining brightly off the glass towers of the financial district, reflecting the undeniable truth of the new reality. I had spent my entire life being underestimated, told that I was too boring, too blunt, too obsessed with the details. But those details had become my weapon and my shield. I had dismantled a criminal syndicate, crushed a corrupt rival, and cleansed my family of parasites, using nothing but logic, evidence, and relentless precision. I leaned back in the chair, taking a deep breath of the conditioned air. In this world, social favor might be bought with a pretty smile and a country club membership, but true power is built on a foundation of undeniable numbers. The ledger was finally balanced, and my empire was just beginning. The most profound lesson from Camille's journey is that your worth is never defined by those who underestimate you. Toxic people may value superficial charm, social status, or loud arrogance, but true power is built quietly through competence, integrity, and undeniable facts. You do not have to shrink yourself to fit a broken family dynamic, nor do you need their validation to succeed. When you focus on mastering your skills and standing firmly in your truth, you create an unbreakable foundation. The ultimate revenge is protecting your peace, setting absolute boundaries, and building your own empire. Share your own experience of setting boundaries and standing up to toxic family dynamics in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button for more stories of empowerment and justice.